Okay, good morning. My name is Frank Meyer, your videographer, and I represent Atkinson Baker Inc. in Glendale, California. I'm not financially interested in this action, nor am I a relative or employee of any attorney or any of the parties. Today's date is March 31st, 2010. The time is 10:10 a.m. This deposition is taking place at City Hall East, Office of the Controller, 200 North Main Street, Suite 300, Los Angeles, California, 90012. This case number is BC 412715, entitled Gregory versus City of Los Angeles. The deponent today is Wendy Greuel. This deposition is being taken on behalf of the plaintiff. Your court reporter today is Faye Goldman from Atkinson Baker Inc. And counsel will now please introduce themselves.
Good morning, my name is Greg Rappaport. I'm representing plaintiffs Jeffrey and Donnie West in the West Family Trust.
I'm Jeffrey West, one of the plaintiffs.
Noel Weiss, I represent the plaintiffs Mary Gregory, and Ms. Gregory is here as well.
Dallas Simmons on behalf of Intervenor Nationwide.
Everett Hinchcliffe for defendant MCM Construction, Inc.
Deputy City Attorney Peter Langsfeld.
City Controller Wendy Greuel.
Okay, court reporter will now please swear in the witness.
Raise your right hand. Do solemnly state under penalty of perjury the testimony about to give in this deposition will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Good morning, thank you. Ms. Greuel, are you feeling well physically and mentally to go forward with your deposition?
I am.
There's no reason why you would be unable to give your best testimony today?
Correct.
Okay, and are you familiar enough with the deposition process that I don't need to explain that process to you?
I'm familiar with it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I understand that you were a city council person in the city of Los Angeles for approximately 7 years. Is that correct?
Correct.
And was the term of that April 2002 to July 1st, 2009?
Correct.
Okay. And I understand that the council district was Council District 2, which included Studio City. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. And during your time as council person in Council District 2, did you chair any committees?
Yes.
What are the committees that you chaired?
I chaired audits and government efficiency, housing and economic development, and transportation.
All right. And when did you chair the city's transportation committee?
From I believe it was 2005 to 2009.
All right. So basically the last 4 years of your term, you chaired the city's transportation committee.
Correct.
All right. I'd like to show you what's been marked as Exhibit 3 to your, or Exhibit 1 to your deposition. This appears to be a September 21st, 2007 letter from you. Can you just confirm that that's a letter that you prepared?
Yes, it's a letter that we sent.
And that's your signature that appears on the second page?
That is correct.
All right. And I noticed that you sent this to Gary Lee Moore, General Manager, Bureau of Engineering for the City of Los Angeles, correct?
Correct.
And Mr. Moore was the head of the Bureau of Engineering at the time?
Correct.
All right. And I noticed that you or someone has written in the name Gary instead of Dear Mr. Moore. Did you do that?
I did.
And were you on a first name basis with Gary Lee Moore?
Yes.
Had you worked with him on any projects that allowed you to get to know him personally?
When I started in the city of Los Angeles, when I started as a council member.
And what experiences generally did you have with Mr. Moore that allowed you to feel that you were on a first name basis with him?
We'd worked with him on a number of projects in the city. He appeared before the city council on a number of items, and so as a somewhat general manager of a department, you interact with them on a sometimes weekly, monthly basis.
Were there other members were there other higher level officials at the Bureau of Engineering at the time that you also were friendly with? For example, did you know Jim Wu?
I did not know Jim Wu.
Did you know someone named John Koo, K-O-O?
I know the names. I think my staff used to work with them.
Okay, and there's a gentleman named Tim Fu, which is spelled F-U. Did you know him, Mr. Fu?
No.
Okay. Going back to Exhibit 1, take what time you need to review it, but I generally just want to ask you, what can you recall prompted you to have this letter sent out?
It prompted on two particular issues. One, the fact that we had a lot of community concerns that were raised, calls that my office received relative to the Moore Park Bridge, as well as you know, I'm a resident of this community and had called my staff on a Sunday, I believe it was a Sunday, indicating I had concern that they were operating on a Sunday and the particular project.
Right. And you said that you were a resident of the area. Is that is it the case that your house is within about 500 feet from the construction site?
I'm not sure how close it is, but I know that it's within the vicinity, yes. It's
Okay.
probably around 500. I've never measured it.
Would you say it's less than a quarter of a mile from the construction site?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And is it fair to say that you personally experienced and felt vibrations from the construction work?
No, I heard the noise.
Okay. And did you sustain any damage to your house or property that you believe is related to the construction?
No.
And have you had your house inspected since the beginning of the construction to determine whether any damage has occurred?
No.
In the letter of September 21st, 2007, which is Exhibit 1, in the second sentence you state, this particular project was not brought to the attention of my council office. I'm going to stop there.
Sure.
Can you explain what you meant by that?
Normally, when there is a project that is a public works project, something that is long-term, the department will notify the council office when the construction is going to begin, have some discussions with neighborhoods. As alluded to in the subsequent part of that question, that sentence, we had extensive conversations regarding the Colfax and the Tahunga Bridge.
I see. And then later in that sentence, you refer to something, it says, all three bridge projects being included in the same construction package. What did you mean by the construction package?
Well, I believe, of my recollection, is there were a number of bridges that were being funded by, I think, federal government dollars, local dollars, and they were looking citywide at shoring up those particular bridges.
Okay. And were you aware that this was called the Los Angeles Bridge Improvement Program?
It may have been. I didn't know the specific name.
All right. Have you ever heard that term, the Bridge Improvement Program?
I've heard that we were improving all of our bridges. I don't know if that was specific to that name, but...
Okay. But you knew that there was an overall effort to remedy some problems with bridges citywide.
Correct. That's what I
Right.
stated earlier, yes.
And when did you first learn about that?
I believe it was when I first was elected in 2002.
Right. And did you ever make an effort to determine which bridges in that citywide program for bridge improvement fell within Council District 2?
Yes.
And do you recall how many bridges fell within Council District 2?
Other than where it says on my letter here where it said that there were 3 bridge projects, that would be my only recollection there.
Okay. Let me go back to paragraph 1 of your letter.
Mm-hmm.
You say in that second sentence, it says, nor was it subject to the level of oversight that the Colfax and Tahunga bridges were. What did you mean by that?
There were several community meetings that were held regarding those bridges, design of those bridges, what it would look like, when it might happen. Those were some of the issues that were, when I first got elected, I attended, I think, a community meeting that had some design ideas, and there was a lot of discussion in the community.
Right. And so these were meetings that took place well before you even found out about the Moore Park Bridge project.
Yes.
So you knew that there was going to be construction on the Colfax Bridge and the Tahunga Bridge before you found out about the Moore Park Bridge.
Yes.
Now, going back to the first part of that sentence, where you say it was not brought to the attention of my council office, what did you believe specifically should have happened to bring the project to your attention?
Again, on both the Colfax and Tahunga bridges, there were community meetings that were held to discuss design, timing, etc. There was no such meeting that occurred or notification that said we're beginning on this date, notification to the community, etc., that had occurred from my recollection on the Colfax and Tahunga.
Okay, and then you're referring, when you say the level of oversight, you're again referring to the same thing, community meetings, information to the public.
Correct.
All right. So are you in any way referring to oversight of the design process itself in this letter? Was that your intent? Let me rephrase.
Okay.
When you're referring to the level of oversight, are you in any way referring to oversight of the design process itself?
Well, what I'm familiar with on the design process of Colfax and Tahunga was more what the bridge would look like when it was completed, not the overall how it was operated, et cetera. It was more, again, the level of oversight that I'm familiar with that my staff would have worked on would have been what it's going to look like and timing closures of the street, ensuring there are traffic signals that address the potential excuse me, change of traffic patterns, et cetera.
Okay. Would the oversight include thinking through potential measures to mitigate vibration and noise impacts on residents?
I think that would, I don't know if that occurred on the Colfax and Tahunga Bridge, but it would have been describing the process. I believe they may have done that in the community meetings.
All right, but when you're sending the letter to Mr. Moore, were you intending to tell him that you were disappointed that that the Bureau of Engineering had not subjected the project to some oversight with respect to mitigating damage to residents at that point that you wrote this letter?
I wrote this letter regarding all oversight. I mean, generally there was oversight, that there was not community notification, there was not community discussion, all of that didn't occur.
Now, you said that you couldn't recall which bridges in the council district were within the citywide bridge improvement program. Is that generally right?
Correct. I mean, I'm familiar with these three. I don't know if there would have been others that were in the district. We were primarily, I think, focused on those that were coming up soon, you know, that we were going to start construction.
Let's mark that as number 2.
She's going to hand it to you when she marks it.
Okay, thank you.
Look at it, though.
Great.
The reporter's handed you what's been marked as Exhibit 2, and this is a page taken from a city database relating to the bridge improvement program. Are you familiar with that database?
I never utilized it, but
Okay, you've never gone on the database
No.
yourself? Okay. Does this help refresh your recollection as to which bridges in the project were within, which bridges in the bridge improvement program fell within Council District 2?
yes.
All right,
So I think the ones that I should have remembered, there was the Foothill one, because that was a big improvement. I was really referring to those that are in Studio City, but those two, the Foothill, I'm familiar with those.
Right. Were you familiar with any of the others on the list?
Not sure on the Fulton Avenue. Again, without knowing exactly what their description was of the bridges. The ones that I'm most familiar with are the ones that are on Foothill Boulevard, the Colfax, Moore Park, and Tahunga. And I'm not sure on the Radford if that is part of the Moore Park Bridge or not.
Okay. You had voted on resolutions prior to 2007 relating to the bridge improvement program, had you not?
I take a lot of votes, so I'm not sure. I would assume so.
And this is Exhibit 3. Okay. Just pass those down. Okay, this is going to be 4.
Is this 4?
Yes. So the reporter is handing you Exhibits 3 and 4 to your deposition. Do these refresh your recollection with respect to the last question I asked?
Could you repeat the question?
Could you read back the last question, please?
You had voted on resolutions prior to 2007 relating to the bridge improvement program, did you not?
I did?
Okay. So at least on 2 occasions, you had voted on resolutions relating to the bridge improvement program, the same program that included the Moore Park Bridge. Is that a yes?
Correct.
Thank you. Now, let's go back to Exhibit 1 of your deposition, your September 21st, 2000 letter to the Engineering Bureau, Mr. Moore. At the bottom of the first page, there's a sentence relating to work on Sundays, and you say in here, even though there's a necessity to work on Sundays, it does not justify the complete avoidance of the process set forth in the LA Municipal Code. Do you see that?
Yes.
Do you know what that reference was to? What that related to?
It related to the fact that we were concerned about the work on Sundays, that when I first heard the noise regarding the Moore Park Bridge, I asked my staff about the actual project and its implementation, and 2, had they received any approval to work on Sundays.
Right. And is it your understanding there's something in the municipal code that requires that?
Correct.
Right. And then going back up to the second paragraph of that same letter, Exhibit 1, there's a reference to, in quotes, earthquake-like vibrations. Do you see that?
Yes.
Right. And I think you said that you didn't personally feel vibrations. Is that right?
Correct.
All right. So what did you base this on?
Based on the complaints I heard from my constituents.
All right. And what were the complaints generally that made you want to describe them as earthquake-like vibrations?
The constituents described them as a shaking occurred when they were, and I don't know the exact process, but whatever they were doing at Moore Park Bridge, the pounding for them, they felt that there was damage to their homes, and they felt the earthquake-like vibrations.
All right. And how are you hearing these complaints?
Both by email and by my staff who received telephone calls.
And how many members of your staff did you have at the time? September 2007.
I'd say 20, 21, I don't recall.
And of those 20 or 21 staff members, how many reported to you of complaints that they had received from residents?
2,
And who were those?
Nancy Hernandez and Evan Roosevelt.
What was Nancy Hernandez's position?
I believe she was the district director at the time.
And what was Evan Roosevelt's position?
He was the liaison to the Studio City and Valley Village community.
Right. And did Nancy Hernandez tell you that she had received emails from residents relating to the construction?
I don't recall if she said she received them or just that they had received complaints. And then I think I received some copies of emails that came to my attention as well.
And did Mr. Roosevelt did Mr. Roosevelt tell you that he had received email complaints?
Yes.
Right. And did Mr. Roosevelt give you any copies or forward to you any emails from residents complaining about the bridge?
I believe my recollection is that I did see something that said people were concerned about the Moore Park Bridge.
Right. Did you also receive emails directly relating to bridge construction?
I don't recall.
Okay. Okay. Do you recall a community meeting taking place shortly after you sent Exhibit 1 at Walter Reed Middle School?
Yes.
And did you attend that meeting?
I did not.
Is there any reason why you didn't attend?
No, I don't know. I mean, other than it being a conflict, I couldn't attend that evening.
Or do you recall whether you sent anybody from your office?
Yes, I believe my staff and you look actually asked this community meeting to be held to convene. So I believe my staff was there present.
Right, okay, so the meeting that was held on September 27th is the same meeting that you're referring to in your letter, Exhibit 1?
I believe so.
Right, and what do you recall happening between the time that you sent the letter to Mr. Moore and the time that this meeting took place, that, if anything, relating to the bridge project?
I believe that we asked the Bureau to be prepared to respond to the community concerns to talk about the process.
Did you speak to anybody at the Bureau personally in advance of the September 27th meeting?
I don't believe so.
And did anyone in your staff speak to the Bureau of Engineering staff before the September 27th meeting?
I'm assuming they did.
Okay. Let me ask you, you had two staff members, Nancy Hernandez and Evan Roosevelt, both of whom related resident complaints to you relating to the Moore Park Bridge construction, correct?
Correct.
Right. Were both of these individuals given any responsibility to deal with residents relating to the bridge?
That was their job was to deal with the residents on any issue, that came to their attention.
Right. And as between Nancy Hernandez and Evan Roosevelt, did one of them take the laboring oar, as it were?
I'm sorry,
Did one of them take the laboring oar or take more responsibility for dealing with residents?
Evan took a greater responsibility. That was his area that he represented for me.
Okay. So what was the geographic area Nancy Hernandez worked with you on?
She was the district director for the entire district.
Okay. Okay. So did Evan Roosevelt report to Nancy Hernandez?
Mm-hmm.
Is that, I'm sorry, yes?
Sorry, yes.
Okay. Did you have any meetings at your office with Nancy Hernandez relating to resident complaints that you can recall?
Specific to this project?
Yes.
We had several conversations about it. I don't recall if we sat in a room or we talked on the phone about it.
Was her office in the same location that yours
No.
was? Okay.
She was in my district office, so although I went there frequently, my downtown office was the primary office.
And do you recall having any sit-down meetings with Evan Roosevelt relating to the Moore Park Bridge project?
I don't recall if they were conversations in person or on the phone.
Did anyone from your office, Ms. Hernandez, Mr. Roosevelt, anyone else, report to you that they had had any discussions with Engineering Bureau staff members prior to the September 27, 2007 meeting?
Yes.
What happened in that regard?
Well, I know when I called them, I believe it was on a Sunday, and said, this is occurring, could you find out exactly what's happening? And also prior to the meeting, we asked them to have conversations for the bureaus to them presenting to the community what the process was, why there was an outreach, some of the issues I outlined in my letter.
Right, so you asked them to talk to people at the Bureau of Engineering, right?
Yes.
Okay, and then did they report back to you that they had done that?
Yes.
And what did they tell you they had done?
They said they had talked to them about being prepared for the meeting to respond to the issues relative to why no notification had occurred both to our office and to the community.
Right. And anything else?
I don't recall any else.
Did, okay. So they have this meeting at Walter Reed Middle School, and how long after that did you hear about what happened at the meeting? The next day?
I don't remember. It may have been, I mean, I talked to my staff frequently, and they may have called me that night and said, here's how it went, or here's the, the next day. I don't recall.
And what do you recall them telling you about the meeting?
Only thing I recall them saying is that it was a contractor that was responsible for notification, that had not occurred, that they also were concerned about this not happening in the future, and that they educated the community about the process.
All right, so just for clarification, who did you understand made the statement about the contractor having failed to give notice?
I don't know. My staff just indicated that was said.
And was that said by someone at the Bureau of Engineering?
I believe so.
Okay. And do you recall who from the Bureau of Engineering you understood had attended that meeting?
I do not know.
Let's mark this as 5.
Thank you.
The reporter has handed you what's been marked as Exhibit 5,
Okay.
which appears to be a copy of a train of emails dating from September 7th, 2007 through October 10th, 2007. First question is, have you seen any of these emails before today?
Well, I would have seen it when it was sent to me, but I haven't seen it recently.
Okay. The email address that appears on the second page is councilmember.greuel@lacity.org. You see that?
Yes.
Was that an email address that residents could use to contact you directly at that time?
This is the email that went to the council office, and then my staff would forward those emails to me that were appropriate.
All right. And do you recall whether this was one of the emails that was forwarded to you?
Yes, it was. I think, as I indicated earlier, I remember receiving some emails.
All right. And then you'll see on the first page, by the way, did you ever meet someone named Steve Browdy?
No.
All right. Did you ever speak to him on the phone?
I don't remember. I was thinking when I met you that you were Steve. Sorry, that there was. I remember there was somebody who called me, but I don't remember if I actually spoke to them on the phone. But I remember some correspondence. So whether it was by phone or email.
Okay. So just for the record, Ms. Greuel has indicated that Jeffrey West. She thought Jeffrey West was Steve Browdy. Okay. And Mr. Browdy's email, September 7th, starts with, Wendy, I've written to you in the past and you've been very helpful. Do you remember what issues Mr. Browdy had raised previously?
I don't.
Okay. And so who at your staff undertook to, was it the case that Mr. Roosevelt undertook to communicate with Mr. Browdy on your behalf?
Yes.
Now, did you see Mr. Roosevelt's October 10th, 2007 email
Yes.
at the time that it was sent?
I don't know if I saw it that day or a couple days later. Or
Was there a process by which your staff was required to get your approval on emails going out to the public?
Some, but not necessarily all of them.
Right. Do you recall whether Mr. Roosevelt's email was one that you had reviewed before it went out?
I don't remember.
Now, in his email of October 10th, he says, I'd like to share some information with you. I've included Bureau of Engineering on the email. They'll be sending you an update. You see that?
Yes.
Right. Was the idea of getting updates out to the community something that your office had suggested in that?
Most definitely.
Okay, and that was in the September 2007 timeframe?
Yes.
So that was not something that the Bureau of Engineering had already planned to do, as far as you could tell?
I know that we asked them to do that specifically because I didn't believe they were adequately notifying the neighborhood. So I don't know if they intended to do that or not.
Right. And was it your understanding that the Bureau of Engineering had been giving updates on other bridge projects previous to the Moore Park project?
Yes, I was familiar with their outreach on the, I think as I mentioned, the Tahunga and the Colfax Bridge.
Right. Now, in Mr. Roosevelt's email, he refers to the community meeting to gauge from the neighbors if work on Sunday would be acceptable. You see that?
Yes.
Was that a reference to the meeting at Walter Reed Middle School on September 27th?
I don't know if that was one and the same.
Okay. Do you recall there being other meetings during that time frame?
No, I'm familiar with, I think, the Police Commission and the 27th meeting that my office convened.
All right. Was there a separate meeting with the Police Commission?
It looks like from this letter, I do know that it went before the Police Commission. I just don't know when and how that occurred.
All right. And so Mr. Roosevelt's referring to Sunday work on the bridge, and he says Saturday work will continue, and John or Jim from the Bureau of Engineering can speak to the reasons why this is necessary. You see that?
Yes.
All right. And then he doesn't go on to talk about the complaints that Mr. Browdy discusses in his email. Mr. Browdy says it feels like an earthquake, and he said, I'm concerned about structural damage or potential damage to my house. Is there any reason why Mr. Roosevelt didn't
I think
address?
you did in the first paragraph. They can also make an appointment with you to examine your home for any structural or aesthetic damage.
All right. So was it your office's position then that the Bureau of Engineering would inspect homes to determine whether there was any damage, and that wasn't something your office would otherwise be involved in?
Well, I don't know the second part of your question of whether or not we would, if we receive a complaint and we ask the department to respond to that complaint, and in this instance, because we'd had complaints about damage to people's homes, we asked them what's the process and would they go out and look at these homes.
All right. And did your office get in touch with the Department of Building and Safety as well to see if they were interested in inspecting residents' homes?
I don't know if they did or not.
Okay, you don't recall?
I don't recall. I think they assumed when they talked to the Bureau that the Bureau would do what was appropriate, whoever was appropriate to go out and look at the site.
So the Bureau of Engineering, again, was the agency that you relied on to go out and inspect the homes?
Correct. That's my understanding.
All right. And do you understand? My understanding is that in the organization of city government, the Department of Building and Safety is separate from the Bureau of Engineering,
Correct.
right? Bureau
Correct.
of Engineering is within the Department of Public Works, correct?
Correct.
And Department of Building and Safety is separate from that.
Correct.
All right. So was there any reason why you didn't contact someone in Building and Safety to get them involved in the inspection process?
Because departments work together, I think our assumption, again, not recollecting the whole conversation, is that if it was a inspection aspect, they would have either someone from their own department or work with the appropriate department to inspect.
I see. And did you ever follow up to make sure that that happened?
To make sure what happened.
That the Bureau of Engineering coordinated its efforts with other agencies, such as Building and Safety?
I wasn't involved in that. My staff may have.
Okay. And do you recall them reporting to you that they had done that they had made sure that there was coordination?
I don't recall.
Did you hear, in the fall of 2007, did you ever hear about the results of any inspections that the Engineering Bureau made of residents' houses?
I don't remember when I heard it, but heard of their report, but I did hear of a report.
Right. And the Bureau of Engineering produced a report?
I don't think I ever physically saw a report.
Okay. And what did you hear about the report?
My staff indicated that they had seen cracks and couldn't determine whether or not it was related to the bridge project or not.
So it was inconclusive?
What I just told you is all I know.
How long had Evan Roosevelt worked for you as of fall 2007?
I don't remember, I'm sorry.
Well, can you tell me generally how long he worked for you overall?
I think he probably worked for me, let's see, that was 2007, maybe a year or so before that.
Okay. And was he working primarily out of your district office?
Yes.
And how often did you see him?
It depended upon the week, so sometimes once a week, sometimes every other week.
Did you have a regular schedule of meetings with your staff at your district office?
We tried to do it on a monthly basis, but I don't recall at that time whether or not we were having it that regularly.
Were you generally satisfied with the work Evan Roosevelt did in your district?
Yes.
And again, his position was liaison to what?
Studio City and Valley Village.
Okay. And that was liaison to the neighborhood associations? Or
The community at large.
I see, okay. I understand that Studio City has a neighborhood council, right?
Yes.
Was his job to be the liaison with that council?
Yes.
And are you familiar with a woman named Lisa Sarkin?
Yes.
All right. Did you ever have any discussions with Lisa Sarkin about the Moore Park Bridge project?
Yes.
What can you recall about that?
She was equally concerned about the Moore Park Bridge and the failure of notification to the community.
And did you ask Lisa Sarkin to bring any of these residents' concerns to the attention of the neighborhood council?
I think the neighborhood council received their own kind of input for people who were participating in that, and we received, so we worked closely with the neighborhood council.
Okay, so residents sometimes complained to people on the neighborhood council that they knew, is that right?
Correct.
And then the neighborhood council would report that through your staff?
Yes.
Right, and was there someone in your staff that was the liaison with the neighborhood council?
As I mentioned, Evan
Oh,
Roosevelt.
okay. Did Evan Roosevelt, was he with your office through the end of your term?
Yes.
Okay, and then do you know what he did after that?
I know he has stayed on until probably a couple months ago and is going to be going to college, going back to finish his degree.
Okay, what's his degree in? What is the degree?
He had not graduated from college, so he's going back to college to finish his degree.
Do you know where he's going to be going back to college?
I don't.
Okay. Do you know if it's within the Southern California area?
I believe so.
Did you write him a recommendation?
I did. I think I wrote a general recommendation, as I recall.
Okay. And do you know what he was going to be studying? I'm sorry.
No.
Did you understand that, strike that, did you give Evan Roosevelt authority to speak about the project to residents on your behalf?
Yes.
And did you understand that he was doing that?
Yes.
Okay. And did he have authority from you to advise residents about the claims process that the city had?
Yes.
And you understood that he was doing that as well?
Yes.
And did you ask him to be a liaison between residents and the Bureau of Engineering?
I don't know if I asked him to be a liaison, but I mean, he would call them when there were questions or concerns, and if they also wanted to call the Bureau of Engineering directly, they could do that as well.
All right. Did you ask him to be a liaison between residents and the Bureau of Contract Administration?
Again, I wouldn't have specifically said, I want you to be the liaison. I would have indicated, please handle the constituents' complaints and work with the appropriate departments.
All right, so you left it to his discretion to determine which city officials to talk to try to resolve complaints from residents.
Yes.
And was it also your understanding that if Evan Roosevelt felt the need, he could also contact the Department of Building and Safety?
Yes.
And as far as you know, did he ever do that?
I don't know.
Did Evan Roosevelt ever provide you with any memoranda that addressed the status of the residents' complaints at any time?
I'm sure he did.
Okay, and what file would those now be located in?
I don't know if it was an email or a letter or what. I don't. If they would be in the council files and Council District 2 files.
And are those located in the district office?
I'm not sure where they are currently.
You don't keep any copies of those?
No, they stay in the Council District office.
Do you recall that he in fact did provide you with some kind of written updates on his efforts to work with residents on the Moore Park project?
Again, I don't know if I don't recall a specific memo. We dealt with in a way of emails back and forth. What's the status? How's it going? What's the latest on the project?
Okay. And do you recall if those emails in which he gave you updates, did those occur throughout the project? In other words, basically from the time you first heard about the project through the time that you understood the project was done?
I believe so.
Do you remember do you remember when the bridge project essentially was completed?
Sometime before I left office, so sometime before July 1st.
So it was sometime in the early part of 2009?
I believe so.
Okay. I'd like to show you another document. No. On the bottom left. Okay. The reporter has handed you what's been marked as Exhibit 6 to your deposition, and I'd like to focus you on the right side of the page.
Uh-huh.
Have you ever seen this before?
I don't recall if I've seen this article before.
All right. I'll let you read through it.
Okay.
Let me know when you've done that. Okay, you've had a chance to read the article?
Excuse me, yes.
Okay, and is there anything in the article that you believe is untrue?
don't, again, I hadn't read it before, I don't believe so.
Okay. And on the right-hand column, there's a little asterisk star on
Yes.
the top. And there's a paragraph relating to Jim Wu.
Yes,
And Jim Wu, did you understand Jim Wu was with the Bureau of Engineering?
yes.
And the article states, the houses surrounding the Moore Park Street Bridge construction site have been inspected and no structural damage has been found. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay. And had you ever received any official report from the Bureau of Engineering stating that no structural damage had been found?
I don't think I received any official report that I'm familiar with. My staff had indicated that's what they identified.
And do you know what that was based on? What discussions your staff had that was based on?
No, other than the appropriate parties going out to review look at the homes.
And again, you were not aware of whether Building and Safety had done any inspections?
Correct.
All right. Now, further on, the article says that Mr. Wu also said the construction crew had been using a technique that should not be used in residential areas. The crew has ceased using that technique at the site, according to Wu. Do you see that?
Yes.
Do you know what that is a reference to?
Well, let me object to calling for speculation from her. She has no way of knowing what he said unless she can tell us she heard him say it.
Go ahead.
I recall that they said that that's what the Bureau told us.
That's what your staff told you?
Yes.
All right. And Evan Roosevelt related that to you?
I believe it was Evan.
Okay. Did you recall whether Nancy Hernandez said anything similar?
I don't recall.
And you had understood that Evan Roosevelt was dealing with people at the Bureau of Engineering and was having direct discussions with engineering staff, right?
Correct.
And did he tell you verbally that the Bureau of Engineering had made a similar statement?
I don't remember if it was verbal or in an email.
Okay. And did you ever find out from Evan or otherwise what the technique was that should not have been used in residential areas?
I don't think he gave me any technical description.
Okay. And did he ever tell you what aspect of the construction that technique related to?
Just in somehow with the way they were putting the piles in.
So it had to do with the piles.
Again, that's what my recollection is.
Okay. And my understanding is that there are at least two different ways piles are used. One is for the foundation, and one is for excavation, to hold up the earth, to shore up the earth. Did you ever hear about that?
Not during the time of this, no.
Okay. So you just heard that there was some technique that related to use of piles.
Correct.
Okay. And do you know whether that related to the use of certain kinds of equipment? For example, there were different kinds of equipment used to drive the piles into the earth. Did you hear anything about that kind of issue with the equipment?
I did hear about that, and it's why in the subsequent letter that I wrote when we were looking at the Colfax Bridge, we asked them what kind of process they were going to use as well for that bridge.
Okay. So when Mr. Roosevelt reported to you that the Bureau of Engineering had made this statement that there was a technique that should not be used in residential areas, did you understand at that time that it had to do with the use of certain kinds of equipment with piles?
Generally, yes.
Okay. Did you ever hear from Mr. Roosevelt that he had given assurances to residents that either the contractor or the city were going to take care of any problems that they were having, residents were having?
I think my recollection is that he would help them through the process of the claims process through the city of Los Angeles.
And did he ever tell you that he was going to assure residents that the city, through the claims process, would take care of any damages that they had?
I don't recall.
Did he ever tell you that he was going to tell residents that the contractor was going to be taking care of any repairs?
Yeah, I just read that in this article, which I had not seen before.
Okay, so now you're referring to the second little star on the right side?
Yes, I'm sorry.
All
Yes.
right.
'Cause it doesn't say which spokesperson, and I don't, my assumption is that he would have gotten that information from the Bureau. I don't think we had any direct relationship with MCM Construction,
Okay, so Evan Roosevelt didn't talk to anyone at MCM as far as you knew?
as far as I know. I don't know if he did or not.
All right. But when it says a spokesperson from your office, you're saying, you're assuming that that was Mr. Roosevelt?
I'm assuming, but I
Okay.
don't know.
And you're assuming that because there wouldn't have been anybody else who would have answered questions from the press about this?
It could have, yeah, I have a communications director, Ben Golumbeck, who was my communications director, I believe, at this time. But if he would have made that comment, he would have gotten the information from Evan.
I see.
So, but I don't know.
So your communications director may have talked to the press about this, but any information
Or-
that he had would have come from Evan
Evan
Roosevelt?
Roosevelt,
Okay.
correct.
And did you ever hear of an instance where MCM did, in fact, pay any costs of damage to residents' homes?
I don't know.
And I probably asked you,
Sure.
do you know whether you received a copy of this article at any point in time?
I don't recall, I'm sorry.
Okay. And you were never interviewed by a newspaper relating to residents' complaints about the Moore Park Bridge?
I wasn't interviewed by Amy for this article, but I don't know if there was other articles. I may or may not have talked to them.
Okay. Do you recall what media you spoke to relating to the residents' complaints?
I don't.
At some point, did you hear about work that was going to be performed to remove piles that had been driven into the ground, and what impact that might have on residents?
I don't remember that.
Okay. Do you recall asking either Mr. Roosevelt or Ms. Hernandez from your office to do anything to try to mitigate any impact of removal of piles during the construction process?
No, I mean, my action to them was to work with the community to address their particular concerns or issues that were related to that bridge.
Now, I understand that you were more familiar at the time, you said, with the Colfax Bridge. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And do you recall that there was a meeting in May 2008 at CBS Studios relating to the Colfax Bridge?
I believe so.
Okay. And do you remember whether you attended that meeting?
I don't remember, sorry. I mean, I don't know if it was a particular one. I mean, I attended the neighborhood council meetings there. I attended the Studio Village meetings there. So there were a number of meetings I attended there where the bridge may or may not come up.
So there were. So you do recall attending some meetings at CBS Studios relating to the Colfax Bridge?
That might have come up. I don't know if they were specific to the bridge or not.
Okay. And
I do remember that there was several meetings specifically to the Colfax Bridge, particularly after the Moore Park issues, that they were having subsequent meetings to talk about that.
I see. Okay. And these were meetings that you attended?
No, I don't believe I attended those.
Okay. So these are meetings that you understood Evan Roosevelt
Correct.
would attend. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Okay. Now, mark this as an next in order. 7.
Thank you.
And while we're at it, 8. This is 8.
Thank you.
The reporter has handed you what's been marked as Exhibits 7 and 8. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and mark this one as 9.
Thank you.
Before we get to these, going back to the question of, you understood that Evan Roosevelt was talking to residents about the claims process generally?
Correct.
Okay. And did he ever tell you that he was going to give or had given assurances to residents that their claims would be paid?
I don't know if he did or not.
He never told you that?
No, I know he provided the claim forms, and I believe also gave them the timeline, et cetera, when to file the claims and assisted them in that process.
I see. Okay. Let's turn our attention to Exhibits 7, 8, and 9. 7 is an email,
Sure.
and 8 and 9, I believe, were the attachments to the emails. I'd just like you
Yes.
to confirm that, first of all.
Yes.
Okay. So
I
8
believe they were, I mean, he suggests these are the attachments. These are the 2 letters that I'm familiar with.
All right. And so the first, and what was your understanding about this email, Exhibit 7? Was this sort of a blast that he was going to send out to residents?
I believe so.
All right. And did he have a list of residents that he used to send these kinds of bulletins out?
My assumption is he would have those that had expressed interest in this issue.
Do you know how many people were on that list?
I do not.
All right. And so Exhibit 8 is this a true and correct copy of a letter that you sent on April 29, 2009?
Yes.
That's your signature on page 2?
Yes.
Okay. And focusing your attention on the first paragraph of Exhibit 8,
Yes.
in the middle of the paragraph, you say, specifically, I am concerned about the process, the outreach and communication with the impacted community, and the methodology for the construction associated with this project. Now, you're talking about the Colfax project.
Yes.
Okay. And what are you referring to when you use the word methodology? Methodology for the construction?
My recollection is correct. It was the fact that they were going to use a different methodology than what had been used for the Moore Park Bridge.
And how is it going to be different, to your knowledge?
My understanding is they were not going to, non-technical term, but pound the piles in. There was a different process they were going to use.
All right. Is that what you were intending to set forth in the bullet points down below?
Yes.
Right. And then you also, in the second bullet point, you said there will be regular monitoring of the noise and vibration levels. You see
Yes.
that?
Yes.
Is that, in fact, the case with the Colfax Bridge? Do you know whether they do noise and vibration monitoring?
Again, that's what I asked them to do, and I believe they, in their subsequent May 21st letter, that they said they would do that.
All right. And do you know whether any monitoring was done on the Moore Park Bridge?
I don't believe so.
And what do you base that on?
I based that on the fact that none of us knew the process wasn't followed. That was our understanding. It was being followed with the Colfax Bridge.
I see. Okay. And did you see the May 21st, 2009
I did.
letter at the
I
time?
did. I did.
Okay, so this letter, Exhibit 9, is a true copy of a letter that you saw around that date?
That is correct.
Okay. And
I asked my staff to send this letter.
I see. You asked your staff to
To
circulate,
write, no, I asked my staff to write this letter,
to write which letter?
the April 29th letter.
I see, okay, and you approved it before it went out?
I approved it and I signed it.
Okay. And when you read Mr. Moore's letter, did you understand that was a response to your letter?
Yes.
Okay. And did you direct Mr. Roosevelt to also send that out to residents?
Yes. I don't know if I have to be honest, I'm not sure if I directed him or assumed he would do that.
Okay. Now, you did that, is it fair to say you did that because you understood that residents in the Colfax Bridge neighborhood were concerned in part about vibration impacts on their neighborhood because of what they had heard from other residents relating to the Moore Park Bridge?
I
Go ahead.
I wrote this letter because I believed the Moore Park Bridge project, that the processes weren't followed as far as notification to the community and involvement in the community, and did not want that to occur in the subsequent Colfax Bridge.
And when you sent this letter of April 29, 2009, had you heard of what had happened with respect to the claims process that residents were following to try to get repairs done to their homes?
I don't recall. I don't recall if it was before or after this.
And what do you recall about the claims process? What did you hear about the claims process at any time? What can you recall?
Well, I recall that when we had the complaints, we asked the Bureau as to what's the process to respond to complaints, because we had a number of our constituents that felt that the cause of some of their damage was related to the bridge project. We were told at some point that there was a time limit, but it was unclear. We hadn't been given all the information as to when that time limit expired. We asked them to extend that time limit for that period of time.
You asked who?
I think it was Bureau of Engineering.
All right.
I'm not sure who the recipient of those claims were necessarily.
Okay.
But we wanted to make sure that the community had ample time or required time based on what information we may or may not have provided to them at the time.
Okay. And did you instruct anyone from your office to follow up with residents about how the claims process was going?
Yes.
Who did you talk to about
Evan.
it? All right. And what did he tell you in that regard?
I believe he's the one who told me that there was a timing issue that we needed to ensure the community had appropriate time to be able to file their claims.
Anything else?
That's all I recall.
Did he tell you anything about the reaction that the city had to the claims?
At some point he told me that they had denied the claims, and we were told at that time the only recourse the constituents had, couldn't appeal the claims, they had to file a lawsuit.
Right. And at some point, were you unable to deal with the issues because of the prospect of litigation?
Well, when we were told that the only recourse the constituents had was to file a lawsuit, I think that was expressed to the community.
Okay. And then after that, did you have any involvement or have your office have any involvement with these complaints about the Moore Park Bridge project?
I don't recall. I mean, again, once that we were told that there was nothing else our office could do, that the only recourse they had was a lawsuit, we did ask whether or not there was a opportunity when they denied their claims for there to be some discussion, dialogue, et cetera, and we're told the only recourse was lawsuit.
Okay. And you said, going back to your last response, you said
Sure.
you were told that your office could not do anything further. What did you mean by that?
Well, what I understand from Evan was when the claims were rejected. I asked, is there anything further we can do? My understanding was, what we were told was that the only recourse for the homeowners was to sue the city.
And who told you that?
Evan told me that.
And what did you understand he was basing that on?
Based on some conversation with either Bureau of Engineering or the City Attorney's Office. I don't recall which it was.
Okay. And without getting into the substance of any communications you had with the city attorney's office, do you recall at any time before your term of office ended, July 1st, 2009, being told that you had to go through the city attorney's office? You couldn't do anything further on your own?
That's what Evan shared with me. That's
Okay.
what I was told.
Okay.
My staff, that's what my staff indicated to me.
And you're saying that your understanding was that was either based on something that Evan was told by the city attorney's office or by the Bureau of Engineering?
By someone in the city, yes.
And did you do anything after that to follow up and confirm whether that was the case?
And I believe that what my staff member told me, they had received that information from someone in the city, so.
So you were satisfied with that and decided you didn't have any further role?
Yes.
Okay. Are you aware of something called
No,
props?
I guess I would go back. I'm not sure I
Sure.
was satisfied with that. I mean, I wanted to be able to make sure that there was some consideration that there was no appeals process, but we were told that was the next step in the process.
And again, that came through Evan Roosevelt.
Correct.
Mr. Rappaport, it is now 11:20, and I think you intended to allow other
Right.
counsel to ask questions.
I do. I have a couple more quick questions, and then I'll turn it over. Ms. Greuel, you're familiar with something called Proposition C funding?
Yes.
Okay, can you tell me generally what that is?
Proposition C was adopted by the voters, and it's used, I believe, for transportation-related projects.
Okay, and let's mark as the next in order. The reporters handed you what's been marked as Exhibit 8. Can you tell me what this is?
You mean 10?
I'm sorry, 10.
This is a motion I introduced for repaving of Moore Park.
And this was repaving after the completion of the bridge construction?
Correct.
All right. And that included the stretch from Laurel Canyon to Carpenter Avenue, which includes the bridge?
Correct.
All right. And I see that your motion included the allocation of funding from Proposition C funds. You see that?
Yes.
Okay. And in early 2009, were there any Prop C funds that could have been used to pay for residence repairs from the Moore Park Bridge construction?
I don't know the requirements of what Prop C, other than I know that it can be used for street repair. I don't know what else it can be used for.
Did anyone at City Hall discuss with you whether the city would attempt to settle damage claims with residents near the Moore Park Bridge?
No.
Now, there's also something called Proposition G funds related to seismic repairs. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not as familiar with that.
Let's mark this as 11. I'm almost done.
Thank
The
you.
reporters handed you what's been marked as Exhibit 11. Have you ever seen this before?
I don't believe so.
Okay. And again, your term of office in City Council ended July 1st?
Correct.
2009? Okay.
Correct.
So is it fair to say you would have received a copy of this during your term?
Yes. My staff would have, yes.
Do you know whether City Council has discussed allocation of funds from
Prop G.
Prop G for repairs to residents' homes relating to the Moore Park Bridge project?
I do not know.
Okay. In the interests of time, I'm going to turn it over to other council. However, I still have more questions to ask, so we're going to have to reschedule a follow-up date. And I understand Mr. Langsfeld's agreeable with that. Is that correct?
It's based on Ms. Greuel's availability.
Right. Okay.
May I take a quick restroom?
Absolutely. Let's go off the record.
Okay, we're going off the record at 11. Okay, we're going back on the record at 11:24.
Ms. Greuel, I introduced myself earlier. I'm Everett Hinchcliffe. I represent MCM Construction, the contractor for the bridge. I had a few questions for you about the Sunday work. Did it happen on more than one occasion or just one occasion, to your recollection?
I recall the particular Sunday when I first heard it. I don't recall whether it occurred after that or not.
Was it your understanding that the Bureau of Engineering had authorized that Sunday work?
It was unclear to us whether or not they had authorized.
Did you do any investigation to determine whether or not they had authorized it?
I believe in the letter that we sent indicated that, and I'd have to look at it, that the approval had not been received, whether that was through the police commission or through the Bureau. I was unclear.
So in any event, it was a one-time thing that you recall?
That I recall, that I experienced.
Your letter also, the September 21, 2007 letter that's been marked as Exhibit 1, also mentions, I think in the second paragraph, let's see. At some point in the letter, I believe it indicates that the Bureau of Engineering was going to inspect the residences, although maybe I've confused that with a different letter. So let me just ask you a general question.
It was an email, I believe, that Mr. Roosevelt sent.
Okay. Do you know why the Bureau of Engineering was going to undertake inspection of the residences?
It actually calls for speculation.
Based on complaints received.
And what was their purpose, though, in going out after a complaint was received to inspect?
Same objection.
To see if any of those potentially could have been related to the Moore Park Bridge project.
Okay. Did you get any feedback back from the Bureau of Engineering as to what their conclusions were?
No, only with what was written in one of the emails that's been presented to me today, or maybe it was an article that said that they didn't believe they were related to the Moore Park Bridge.
Had the city at any point represented to residents that if they in fact had concluded there were damages from the bridge work, that they would take responsibility for it?
I don't recall.
Is that something that the a city representative such as yourself is empowered to do?
To indicate that we would?
Yes.
No, but I believe it would be the Bureau of Engineering.
So it's their decision to make?
It would not be a council decision, no.
Well, so is it your understanding then that the Bureau of Engineering has the power on behalf of the city to agree that some item of damage was caused by some work they undertook and agree to reimburse the residents for that damage?
Mr. Hinchcliffe, I'm going to object to the question, calls it for legal conclusion. Please don't answer the question.
Okay.
Do you have any understanding at all on that subject?
No.
I don't have anything further, thank you.
There you go. Have you had occasion, my name is Noah Weiss, here on behalf of...
I know, yes.
Very, very, very.
I want to make sure for the record.
Yes, sir. Tell me, Ms. Greuel, what documents, if any, you reviewed prior to attending your deposition here today?
I believe the 2 letters that I sent.
Okay,
And
the
there
2
might have
letters.
been the email request for the deposition.
Okay, so the two letters you're referring, can you be more specific?
Sure, the September 21st and I believe it was the April 29th.
Okay. And then some emails relative to this deposition today?
The request for the deposition.
Okay. No other documents?
No.
Did you talk to anybody other than your counsel prior to your coming here today relative to the matters involving the Moore Park Street?
Nancy Hernandez was present when we talked to the city attorney.
Okay, but other than Nancy Hernandez?
No.
Did you try to get in touch with Evan Roosevelt?
No.
Try to get in touch with Jim D'Antona?
No.
Jim D'Antona have anything to do with any aspect of the Moore Park Bridge situation?
I don't remember if he did or not.
You don't have any specific recollection to sit here today telling him to do anything relative to the Moore Park Bridge project?
No, I mean, Mr. D'Antona and Mr. Thrush were two of my planning deputies, so they dealt a lot within Studio City. I don't know if they were involved, I don't recall if they were involved in this or not.
Okay. Some reference earlier to Council District 2 files. What's your understanding, when was the last time you looked at the Council District 2 files relative to the Moore Park Bridge project?
I don't know if I ever looked at the files.
Okay, what would the files consist of, if you know, relative to this issue? Just, I'm talking about your general filing system, how you would deal with this problem as it evolved from a documentation standpoint, creating a file, maintaining a file, that sort of thing.
I don't know. I wouldn't have maintained a file. It would have been my staff. It would be anything that they thought was relevant that they needed to have. On my files, I had a cron file that would include any letters I sent out.
Okay, so you had a personal cron file, and then there was...
I didn't personally have it. My staff, my scheduler, office manager, I think, kept copies of that.
Okay, so in the cron file would consist of letters that you sent out?
Correct.
Anything else?
Not in the cron file, no.
Okay, what other files would exist that may have documents in them that would relate to, for want of a better term, the Moore Park Bridge situation?
I don't know, because I didn't keep my own files.
Okay, but did you...
I didn't review my staff's files.
What kind of office organization did you have, Ms. Greuel, to maintain files on anything?
I was not involved in the day-to-day management of the files in my office. My staff, with emails these days, most people have those emails. They don't necessarily keep a separate file. So I don't know how my staff kept them.
Okay. You never gave any specific direction to your staff as to how your office files would be organized?
No.
So if in connection with the Moore Park Bridge, you as councilperson wanted to educate yourself about the specifics of what was going on in connection with this claim, beyond just talking to your staff member, if you wanted to see the physical documentation, what would you do?
I would ask my staff if they had any other physical documentation, if there were emails I needed to see.
And where would they go for that?
I don't know.
You don't know? Okay. Other than emails, would there be any other documentation in connection with this project that would be in your council office file?
I believe probably again, an assumption that they would have a copy of the letter that we received from Mr. Moore.
Okay, that was in connection with Colfax Bridge. The letter from Mr. Moore is in connection with
Correct.
Colfax Bridge.
Correct.
Was there any correspondence from Mr. Moore relative to the Moore Park Bridge project?
I don't know.
So we talked about September, the original Exhibit 1 letter that you sent
Correct.
out. That was to Mr. Moore, correct?
Correct.
Did he ever respond to that letter?
I don't believe he responded in writing. I don't know.
To you? Okay. Did you, what follow-up did you personally undertake with regard to the September 21st, 2000 letter? After you sent it out, what did you do personally by way of follow-up?
I kept in close contact with my staff members to see where we were in the project and to ensure that the meeting took place, they were responding to the community, et cetera.
Okay. A lot of people in public office keep logs, they keep diaries, they keep some kind of listing of who they talked to, just briefly, just the fact of discussions.
I don't keep that.
So you don't have any way, as you sit
Of
here
every
today,
staff conversation I had, no.
of just the fact of follow-up? So there's nothing by way of organization, for example, that you can go to where you can say, okay, I talked to Evan Roosevelt on such and such a date, Ray, just Moore Park Ridge, without getting into the substance of the discussion, just the fact of the discussion. Anything like that?
No.
Is that unique to this situation, or was that just your general
That's my
way of doing business?
general way of doing business.
All right. So when you didn't hear from Mr. Moore directly, did you expect to hear back from him personally? Since you sent him
You mean
personally?
a letter?
Yes, your September
I-
21st letter was addressed to him personally. Wouldn't it be proper protocol for him to at least respond to you personally? Since this is a letter from a council member to, to a general manager?
I believe he was handling the situation. I believe I saw him at one point and said, I was concerned about the process that happened, understand he was working with my staff.
Do you recall, when you say you saw him, could you?
Or talked to him. I don't remember when that was.
Was it shortly after you sent out the letter, do you think?
It could have even been before I sent the letter. I'm not sure.
Okay, so I'm just primarily
He was
concerned about the
aware.
phone.
He was aware of my concern about the process followed with Moore Park Bridge. Yes.
Okay, when you say process followed, could you be more specific? What you mean when you say process?
It's in my letter that was not subject to level of oversight. There was not any outreach to the community to let people know that it was happening.
Okay. That was the process as far as communication of what was happening with the constituents. That's one aspect of the process.
Yes, communication with the constituents and communication with my office.
So, because you weren't, is it normal protocol for a council office to be advised when when a bid is rewarded for a major project in the council district?
Not a bid being rewarded, but a project going forward and when it's going to start, yes.
Okay, so what's your knowledge about the general process that's involved when a bridge project such as this is undertaken by the City of Los Angeles? What happens? Is it put out to bid?
I believe so.
Okay. And once it's put out, and is the council office generally aware of the fact that it's put out to bid?
Not necessarily.
Okay. Were you aware of the Moore Park Bridge project being put out to bid?
No, not that I was aware of.
Okay.
Again, we were aware of that there were several bridge projects happening in the entire city of Los Angeles. We were aware of community outreach that occurred around Colfax and Tujunga. And when I saw the list, I remembered very clearly the Foothill Bridge. We took a lot of that was related to the design, that they were going to, in essence, take down that bridge in certain areas so that those we were very, very familiar with. They had engaged our office in how we were going forward.
Do you recall any concern about the strength of the infrastructure, the bridge infrastructure of the City of LA as a result of a bridge collapse in Minnesota back around 2006?
Most definitely, yes. I introduced a motion asking the city to provide to us those bridges that were in the highest risk.
And was Moore Park?
I don't believe so. Colfax was.
Colfax was. Was there a reason, as far as you know, that why Moore Park went before Colfax?
I do not know the reason.
So once the bridge is put out for bid, is it your testimony, Ms. Greuel, that your office may or may not know about the fact of it being put out to bid?
Correct.
And you didn't have a policy of directing the Bureau of Engineering to let you know specifically when a bridge in your district was put out for bid? Is that your testimony?
Yeah, that's correct. Particularly because in most instances where there was a major reconstruction of a bridge, our office was involved in the process of letting people know this was going to be happening.
So you just assumed they would let you know? Just in the natural order of things?
Well, my experience had been, since when I first was elected, that we were having conversations about the Colfax Bridge and that they were involving the community, that was their standard practice.
Okay, so again, so your answer is yes, that you just assumed they would let you know?
Yes.
Do you know when the Moore Park Bridge was put out for bid?
I do not.
Assuming it was put out for bid in June of 2007, once the project was put out for bid, particularly since you live near the Moore Park Bridge. What would be the estimate of the distance of your house from the bridge? Do you have an estimate?
I don't know if it's 500 feet or whatever. I don't know.
Close, but
Close enough. Close enough for me to hear. I can. Maybe if you have the number, if you can tell me, because I'm sure you've looked at it. Maybe you could tell me now. I'll know.
But you do recall. Well, what's the first thing that you remember when you first found out that work was starting on the Moore Park Bridge?
I remember seeing a sign on Moore Park about a project coming forward, but didn't see what it was, and then a Sunday where I heard the noise and called my staff member that day.
So the sign was, what was the timing between when you saw the sign and when you first heard it?
I don't recall.
Was it a short period of
I
time?
have no idea.
You don't remember?
I don't remember.
Okay, so when you heard the noise, you were surprised.
Correct.
Were you upset?
Yes.
And the first call that you made after you heard the noise was to whom?
Nancy Hernandez.
And what did you tell her?
I asked Nancy what was happening on Moore Park Bridge on a Sunday and had our office been notified.
Okay. And what was her response?
So I recall her response was she was not sure. She would call and find out, and then report it to me that week. I don't remember if it was Monday or...
Okay, and that was the first, and there was a follow-up conversation with Nancy Hernandez.
Correct.
Is there any reason why at that point in time you wouldn't pick up the phone and call Gary Moore and ask him what was going on?
Well, I wanted to first ask my staff if they were aware of it, and so that was the intent, and then they talked to Gary Moore.
Okay,
I don't remember when I spoke to Gary in that time period.
Okay, but the question
Sure.
was, as opposed to calling your staff to talk to Bureau of Engineering, was there any reason or any impediment for you calling Gary Moore directly yourself and saying, look, I didn't know about this, what's going on, I want my staff notified yesterday about the specifics of this situation? Was there any reason why you couldn't have done that?
Well, I first called my staff because I wanted to know if they knew anything about it or had had any information. That was my first call.
Okay, when you learned that they knew nothing, then was there any impediment to you immediately calling Gary Moore and
I
finding out?
subsequently sent a letter to Mr. Moore with that September 21st.
Okay, do you
I
know
don't
when-
remember the timeline between those two.
Okay. For the record, I think we've established that the start date was September 7th, was it? So, in the first Sunday in September 7th was a Thursday, if I recall.
It was 6th, Thursday.
6th was a Thursday. So you didn't hear it on the Thursday or the Friday? The first time you heard it was a Sunday?
That's my recollection, yes.
Was there any reason for delay of roughly 2 weeks between your first hearing it on Sunday and your letter to Mr. Moore?
I'm going to object, Mr. Weiss. There's no testimony by Ms. Greuel about the date when she first heard the sound, other than it's a Sunday.
Okay. For the record, I think we have Exhibit 2 to the Bustamante deposition. Here, and just for purposes of, I don't think we need to introduce it, but I would want to show it to Ms. Greuel and to counsel that indicates this is the work order from the City of LA, which reflects, maybe this would refresh your recollection about hearing it sometime before Sunday.
Well, you're asking the wrong person.
Well, I'm asking her.
Then you don't need to show it to her.
Okay, well, for the record, Ms. Greuel, my question is, September 7th was a Friday. Looks like September 7th was a Friday, so the Sunday would be September 9th. Your letter to Mr. Moore was September 21st. In between the 9th and the 21st, you instructed your staff to go and inquire what's going on. After some undefined time frame, your staff comes back to you and tells you what's going on, correct? Okay, what did they tell you that you can recall?
They indicated to me is that they had not done the outreach to the community, that it had been contracted out, that it was not the Bureau of Engineering, and that they were looking into the issue of the operation on Sundays.
Okay.
And then, as I indicated earlier, I don't remember whether or not I spoke to Mr. Moore prior to sending this letter or after sending this letter. This was a document that indicated my concern.
And what was Mr. Moore's response to you when you did have apparently some oral conversation with him about this?
As I recall, he indicated that he understood they had not done the outreach that was normally required on the bridges.
Beyond the outreach, what else? Any
I
other?
don't recall.
Was there any discussion about the technique being used that was creating this problem?
I don't believe we got into that detail of technique.
Was there any discussion about how to try to deal with the problem of?
Sure. Yes.
Okay, and what did Mr. Moore say in terms of trying to deal with the
I
problem?
don't remember what he answered, other than I indicated that proper notice, from my understanding, had not occurred, that first I'd heard of it was when I heard the noise on a Sunday, that was not responding to the community, and that I expected them to look into this issue.
Okay, that takes care of the notification problem. Beyond the notification problem, there was the problem of potential damage caused by the vibration. What did you and Mr. Moore discuss with regard to trying to mitigate or lessen the possibility of damage going forward to the homes of the people in the community because of this activity?
Well, clearly I wrote that in the letter, that I wanted them to look into that. And in the subsequent email that Mr. Roosevelt sent.
Well, did you have any conversations with Mr. Roosevelt where he described to you any communications he had from the Bureau of Engineering as to how these, what you describe in the letter, earthquake-like vibrations could be avoided going forward?
Again, I asked Mr. Roosevelt to work with the Bureau of Engineering to address these issues.
Okay. And what did Mr. Roosevelt tell you the Bureau of Engineering said about how they were going to address the issue of avoiding what you describe as earthquake-like vibrations?
Well,
I'm not talking about notifying the community. I'm talking about the actual vibrations from the activity. How is the
I
Bureau of
don't-
Engineering going to solve that problem?
I don't know. I asked him to work with them to address that issue.
Okay, and what did he tell you that the Bureau of Engineering said in response to your inquiry? Do you remember?
I do not remember, other than they were using this technique of pounding the piles, that's all.
Okay, but the objective of your letters, I understand, was to try to, I mean, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong. Was the objective of your letter to Mr. Moore, was the intent to ask the Bureau of Engineering to figure out a way to avoid these earthquake-like vibrations going forward?
The intent was to provide to the community and to our office the technique that they were using, the notification of how long this was going to take, what options did they have, and was this going to be an ongoing driving of the piles.
Okay, and what was
Because I
their...
recall initially that they didn't believe it was going to be a very long period of time and that they were almost finished with that.
Okay, and what was your recollection that we're talking short-term and near completion based on?
I don't recall.
You don't recall. Are there any documents that you are aware of that may exist that would be in the council file that would reflect on this question?
I don't know.
Was it your staff's modus operandi, manner of procedure, when they had communications with the Bureau of Engineering in this case to take notes about what the Bureau of Engineering told them?
I don't know.
So you never gave your staff any direction at all to keep any kind of documentary record about who said what to whom in connection with this issue? As far as their contacts with the Bureau of Communications? Is that what you're saying?
Mr. Weiss, what I'm saying is I have professional staff and would assume that they will do what they need to do to manage their job.
Okay, but they work for you, correct?
That is correct.
And you rely on them to gather information as you've
Correct.
testified so that you can act to protect your
Correct.
constituents, is that correct?
I do not direct them how to put their files together.
So it's up to them to decide on their own how they put their files together. Is that what you're saying?
I have a district director and a chief of staff that are responsible for the management of that staff.
Okay, and does the management of the staff, does your office protocol require your people to, I'm just talking generally now, not with regard to this, but generally, when they have follow-up inquiries, do they in some way, shape, or form document the content of those follow-up inquiries?
I do not know how Mr. Roosevelt kept his files.
I'm not talking about Mr. Roosevelt specifically, I'm talking generically. It's a matter for you to do your job. You have to know.
Mr. Weiss, if I've indicated to you, I hire people who I believe can do their job, manage their files, and respond.
Okay,
I
so-
do not direct them how to do their files, how to answer their phone, how to do any of that. I assume when I've hired them that they will be responsible for their job.
Are they supposed to memorize these conversations that they have, Ms.
Mr.
Greuel?
Weiss,
What?
you're flogging a dead horse and you're harassing Ms. Greuel. Go to something else, or the deposition, as far as you're concerned, ends. Now, you heard me, didn't you?
I heard you,
Okay, good.
but I'm not required to follow your direction. If you want to make an objection, Mr. Langsfield, make your objection for
I've
the record.
made the
If
objection
you-
for the record.
Okay.
And
Then-
if you continue on this line of questioning, I'm going to ask Ms. Greuel not to answer any more of your questions.
Well, then that's fine. You can do that, and then we can compel Ms. Greuel to answer the questions, or ask a judge to basically
I have
intervene.
answered your question.
Well, my question is, with regard, let's go specifically with the Moore Park Bridge project, since you're going to get some instructions apparently not to answer. And we'll go from there. Since if we want to cover up information, we'll cover up information. So,
We do not want to cover information.
all right, fair enough. And I'm entitled, I will tell you that and your counsel knows this, I'm entitled to inquire as to information that can lead to the discovery of admissible evidence, okay? Now, you were, well, as a council member, nobody expects you to remember everything. You have a staff, you have a chief of staff. Different people run their council offices in different ways. It's also not reasonable to expect that people are going to memorize information that is obtained by way of third-party communications directed by you. People on your staff may need to have access to that information for whatever reason, either because Mr. Roosevelt may not be there, Mr. Hernandez may not be there, whatever. There has to be some kind of sustainability here, okay? So it's not unreasonable for me to inquire whether or not, when these conversations were held at your direction between your staff and the Bureau of Engineering, whether somebody made a note of them.
My
Now,
response was, I don't know how Mr. Roosevelt kept his files or how he kept his notes.
Okay, so your testimony, so we're clear, is you never looked at anything prepared by Mr. Roosevelt by way of documentation of his conversations with anybody at the Bureau of Engineering.
Correct.
Is that correct? Ms. Hernandez, do you know whether she kept notes of any conversations that she had with,
I do not.
with anybody relative to the Muir Park Bridge project?
I do not.
Do you know whether or not she kept her own files?
I do not.
Who would? Who would know that information?
Ms. Hernandez, and I don't know.
Is she the only one? Who else, if you don't know Ms. Greuel, who in your office would know? Whether Ms. Hernandez or Mr. Roosevelt kept files of their conversations with regard to the Moore Park Street project?
I don't believe anyone other than Ms. Hernandez or Mr. Roosevelt.
And would the same be true of Mr. D'Antona?
Related to,
Moore Park Bridge project.
oh, Mr. D'Antona would know that, I don't.
Okay, so is it your testimony, you don't know whether Mr. D'Antona had any involvement with the Moore Park Bridge project?
I don't recall whether he did or not.
Okay, do you recall?
He's a member of my staff. He might have come up in staff meetings, others, but I don't
Okay.
recall.
Other than Mr. Roosevelt, other than Ms. Hernandez, anybody else on your staff would have knowledge about what kinds of activities were undertaken by your office in connection with the Moore Park Street Bridge project?
I'm assuming anyone who participated in staff meetings would know if we discussed the Moore Park Bridge.
And who leads the staff meetings?
Myself or my chief of staff, or Nancy if it was a district meeting.
Okay, so any staff meetings in which you were involved, do you recall any discussions about files kept by Ms. Hernandez or Mr. Roosevelt or Mr. D'Antona or anybody on your staff relative to the Moore Park Bridge project?
No.
Is it possible that staff meetings could have been held with your chief of staff and not you?
Could have been.
Did you have any discussions with your chief of staff about the Moore Park Bridge project?
Yes.
Okay. Other than, when do you recall those discussions, the first discussion that you had with your chief of staff about the Moore Park Bridge project?
I don't recall.
Do you recall the subject of the conversation, other than just?
Well, it was a subject when I found out on a Sunday that this project was happening. So I'm assuming we talked about it in my staff meeting that week.
Okay. Anybody keep notes during the staff meeting?
No.
Is there an agenda for the staff meeting?
Sometimes.
And who would have copies of the agenda?
I don't believe we would have kept any of the copies of an agenda.
So you have staff meetings, you have an agenda, and after the staff meeting, you throw the agenda away? Is that your testimony?
I don't keep them.
Did you know who would keep them?
If it was in a email, if it was in a form, they might have kept it on the computer, but
But the agendas are printed out, right?
yes.
Is there a file that has, one file that has the agendas of staff
I
meetings?
don't know.
Who would?
My chief of staff,
And who was that?
Claire Bartels.
Okay, she was chief of staff at the time?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall any specific conversation with Mr. Moore where you asked him how the Bureau of Engineering could mitigate the vibrations that were the source of the complaints by the constituents, the vibrations to their houses? Do you recall any discussion with Mr. Moore about how that could be mitigated going forward?
The details of that?
Just generally.
I think my letter talked about that.
Did talk about it, said that they were...
Asked him to do that. We did not have a specific conversation. He was the head of the bureau.
Mhm.
He was not on the project or out there, so we did not have that detail of a conversation.
But with regard to the Colfax Bridge project, did you have any conversations with Mr. Moore about how to avoid the vibration problem?
I sent him a letter about that.
Okay, before you sent him the letter, did you have any conversations with him about it?
I don't recall if I had a specific conversation with him or said we didn't want to have happen the same thing where there was not notification discussion. And at some point in time, I was notified, and I do not know whether it was prior to me sending the letter to him in April or not, but was to look at how this was going to be done for the Colfax Bridge.
And what did he say? Other than what...
I don't believe he said anything different than what he wrote in his letter.
Okay, so you made it clear that with regard to Colfax, you did not expect this vibration problem to reoccur, correct?
My understanding is what he told me when he wrote this, that they were going to use a different technology.
Okay, but that was in response to your...
I don't know if it was in response to me or in response to after they did the Moore Park Bridge.
So do you have any indication that, well, did you have any conversations, or did you, well, are you aware of any information that would cause you to conclude that what happened with the Moore Park Bridge project was, with regard to the driving of the piles, in any way deficient or defective?
I would, no, I didn't have any conversations about that.
So the avoidance of the, or what we're talking about is avoiding the vibrations, correct? That was the
I
goal.
don't know, that's what I'm asking, you're asking me the question.
Yes, I mean, your goal was to make sure that we didn't have a repeat of the vibration problem.
Correct.
Now, and that concern was the result of what happened on Moore Park Bridge project?
Correct.
The vibrations that did occur, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, do you know how long this problem of the vibrations did occur on the Moore Park Bridge project?
I do not.
Did you ever
I'd
take
like
any
to.
steps to try to find out? Yourself personally, as opposed to telling your staff to do it?
I'm sorry, you want to know how many days they had the actual vibrations?
The extent of the problem. You testified earlier, Ms. Greuel, that you thought you had some initial indication that maybe this was a short-term situation. It was going to end soon. Is that an accurate summary of your
Correct.
testimony? And that was based, and that was based upon reports from your staff, as I understand it?
From the Bureau of Engineering,
But
to my staff,
to your
yes.
staff, which you never took independent steps to verify, correct? Of which there are no notes of those conversations, correct?
Not that I know of, sir.
Not that you know of, okay. Or that you ever asked for to review.
I trust my staff when they tell me what they have heard and been told by a department.
Okay. So, and you expect your staff to remember every conversation that took place with regard to Moore Park Bridge project without writing it down in kind of a summary?
Mr. Weiss, we're back to this objection I made, you're harassing Ms. Greuel. Okay? I can tell you right now, I doubt that she went out there and stood around and measured the vibrations or how long they lasted. She's actually a busy person.
She didn't have to, Mr. Langsfield. She could just stay in her home and feel them, okay?
She said she didn't already.
Or go over, or
You're
go over 2
arguing with the
blocks.
witness, Mr. Weiss. Stop it.
Okay, Mr. Langsfield. Are you making an objection?
Yeah, I'm telling you, stop it.
Is that?
That's an objection, because the deposition ends if you don't quit harassing Ms. Greuel. And I'm telling you that right now. I can end it the second you continue this.
Okay, and we can get a court to resume it.
Anything you want to do.
Okay, if you want to instruct her not to answer, you can instruct her not to answer.
I have a number of choices. One of them is to terminate the deposition. I'll terminate it the second you continue harassing Ms. Greuel. So I'm telling you to stop it.
And could you identify for the record the harassment, Mr. Langsfield?
It's on tape. Okay, stop it, Mr. Weiss. Don't play stupid with me. You're playing with the wrong person.
Okay, so you don't want to identify what you contend is the harassment?
It's on the record, Mr. Weiss. Like I said, don't play stupid with me.
Ms. Greuel, you were chairman of Audits and Efficiency Committee?
I was, yes.
For how long?
I don't know if it was 3 years, I don't remember.
Do you remember the time frame?
It would have been maybe 2003 to 2005.
Okay, were there ever, and what is the Audits and Efficiency Committee? What does that do? What's the jurisdiction of that committee?
To review audits from the city controller's office and to look at other items in which the city can become more efficient.
To save money?
Mhm.
Is it, save money in terms of possibly mitigating constituent claims where they possibly can be avoided?
Sure.
Do you ever have any, during your tenure, ever have any issues relative to constituents' complaints in terms of public works projects?
I don't know if it was under being in audits and government efficiency other than sidewalk issues that Ms. Hahn and I used to deal with.
And were you, let me ask you, were you at all concerned about during this Moore Park Bridge problem, once you became aware that the constituents were complaining that their houses were being damaged, were you concerned at all about the potential claims that they could make against the city? Was that a focus of your concern in any way, shape, or form?
My focus was on the constituents.
Okay, what does that mean?
My focus was trying to address the issues of the constituents.
Okay, well, one of the issues was the damage to their house.
Correct.
Okay, so you're...
That's why we provided them with the information to file the claims.
Okay, but that information wasn't provided to them until much later, isn't that right? About how to file claims?
What we provided the constituents initially was asking the department to go out and to determine whether or not their homes had been damaged by the Moore Park Bridge reconstruction.
To verify their claims?
By that point, they hadn't filed claims yet.
Well, I'm talking the generic
I asked
claims.
them to go out and to review their homes and to look at their homes because we had received numerous complaints.
And this
My
is-
responsibility was to address the concerns of the constituents.
And the way that you did that was to have the Bureau of Engineering go out and look at the homes of those constituents who had complaints. Is that
I
correct?
asked the Bureau of Engineering to go out, whether they went with, I don't know who they took out to each of the homes, but for them to go out and look at that. The complaints had been received that their vibrations had caused damage to their homes.
And this was, at what point in time did you ask them to do this?
I don't recall, I think there's emails and messages here that have already been provided by you all to me that indicate when we instructed the department. We may have done it verbally as well.
Is there anything in this letter of September 21st that asked them to do that? That you can identify for me?
I don't believe it's in this written letter.
Okay, had you thought about that at the time that you
Yes.
had written this letter?
Yes.
Is there a reason why it's not in this letter?
We asked them to come to the community meeting for them to discuss all of those issues on Thursday, September 27th.
But your testimony, as I understand it, was that you were concerned about the constituent complaints. And
Correct.
that you wanted the Bureau of Engineering to go out and look at the houses to discuss
There
with
were
the...
a variety of things that I wanted the department to do.
Okay,
One, to provide information to the constituents as to when, how this was going forward, what, all of the above.
The issue with regard to the inspection of the homes, which is what you testified to a couple of minutes ago, my question to you, Ms. Greuel, is when you formed that intention? At what point in time? Was it before the September 21st letter, or was it after the September?
I have no idea.
All right, do you
But
have any...
If a constituent says they had damage to their home related to this, that was part of what we asked about.
And you had knowledge before September 21st of constituents' complaints about the vibration? But there's nothing in this letter, and my question is, that you've been able to identify, is there a reason why you omitted the command, if you will, or directive to the Bureau of Engineering to go out and look at the homes of the people who contended that their houses had been damaged?
I don't recall whether, I mean, I didn't include everything on this particular letter. I asked them to have a meeting to talk to the constituents about all the issues that had been raised,
Okay, that's a general community meeting.
in addition to people who felt they were impacted by. My
That-
assumption was the department, as we instructed them, would address all the issues the constituents brought forward.
Okay, but you instructed them orally to do the inspections. Is that what your testimony is?
No. What I'm telling you is I instructed them to address the concerns of the constituents, and subsequently, there's also a letter, an email that Mr. Roosevelt sent out to say that they are coming to your home.
Do you know whether anybody from your office attended any, well, first of all, do you know whether any inspections actually occurred?
I was told they did,
And by whom were you told that?
by Mr. Roosevelt and I believe by Bureau of Engineering.
Does Mr. Rose, again, we don't know whether Mr. Roosevelt kept notes of those conversations, correct?
That is correct.
Now, if he did, would he take those notes with him?
What is take his notes?
Well, he doesn't, he no longer works for the city of Los Angeles, correct?
That is correct.
So what would he do if he had notes or documents when he left? What would he take them with him?
I don't believe he would take them with him. I believe he would, whatever notes he would have, they'd be in the files.
And the files would consist of, again, is there like one big, I mean,
I believe that there are files that would have been left in the office.
And would the files have had a name?
Mr. Weiss, I do not know whether he put a name, where he put them.
Okay, well, if I were to ask for those files...
I would
Ms.
assume there would be a name, Mr. Weiss, that said Moore Park Bridge, yes.
Okay, so
If there's a file that's there.
So if I want, so if council in this case want to ask for those files, what would be the way to characterize those files so that we would be able to gain access to them?
Mr. Weiss, ask, I'll figure it out.
Well, I appreciate that, Mr. Langsfield, but since...
I don't know how you would describe them. I mean, you've asked for a file on Moore Park Bridge.
Okay, so if the word files is used, that would be sufficient generic description so that you would be able to assist Mr. Langsfield in providing that documentation?
I don't have the files, and I'm no longer in Council District 2.
No, I appreciate that, but nevertheless, so is it your testimony that you didn't keep copies of any of this stuff? It's all in Council District 2 filing system as however it exists right now, is that correct? But your staff, do you recall ever being told by your staff, Ms. Greuel, that they actually went to inspect the houses of the constituents?
I don't recall.
So you don't know, as you sit here today, whether your staff ever actually went out to any of the houses?
I believe that Mr. Roosevelt went out to some of the houses, yes,
How do you know that?
because he told me.
When did he tell you?
I don't, during this time period,
Did
I
he tell
don't
you
know.
in September of
I
2007?
don't know. I don't know. I don't know when he went out.
Did he go out once?
I don't know.
Twice?
I don't know.
You don't know. After he went out, did he come back and tell you that he went out?
Yes.
And beyond telling you that he went out, what else did he tell you?
That he saw cracks in the homes.
Anything else?
Not that I recall. I don't.
And what was your response to having been told that there were cracks in the home?
That should be part of they go forward on the claim process.
So it was, do you know whether the Bureau of Engineering itself ever went out to look at the houses?
I was told they did.
And that was Mr. Roosevelt again telling you?
Yes.
And how did he know?
I'm assuming he had a conversation with them. They told him that occurred.
Because you never yourself asked Mr. Moore for any kind of a direct report back as to what was happening with your constituents' concerns about this earthquake-like vibration.
Mr. Weiss, I will go back to what I've said before. I hire employees. I trust them to do the job. They inform me the information and where I can be helpful to ensure that we can respond to our constituents.
If your concern, Ms. Greuel, was, well, I don't want to assume, was your concern about stopping the vibrations, if possible, as they were occurring?
Yes.
So given that that was your concern, if you didn't get information from Mr. Roosevelt or any member of your staff, and you had continued complaints about the vibrations, what did you do in that situation? What was your follow-up?
If I was continuing to have
Concerns about the vibrations ongoing. You were concerned initially, you tell your staff to go to the Bureau of Engineering, look into it, report back to you. The response was ambiguous. There was no clear response about what they're going to do to stop the problem. We know we have the response on Colfax from the get-go, but as far as Moore Park, we don't have a response. What did you do when you got an ambiguous response from your staff about stopping the earthquake-like vibrations that were occurring?
the department
Okay, you guys,
I need to stop.
okay.
Okay, this completes DVD number 1 in the testimony of Wendy Greuel. We're going off the
You
record
running out
at
of time?
12:12. Okay, this begins DVD number 2 in the continuing testimony of Wendy Greuel. We're back on the record at 12:19.
Okay, so we'll, another 5 minutes max.
Well, I think I told you that at 12:30 Ms. Greuel has to leave.
12:30, okay, so,
Is that correct, Ms. Greuel?
all right, so we'll, 6 minutes max. All right, and Mr. Rappaport's request here, I wanted to authenticate this motion. It has your signature on it, January 6, 2009. So take a look, and we'll add this as Exhibit 12 to the deposition. This is a,
Just hand it to them.
okay.
Don't do it. Okay.
No, it should be, I know, but there's multiple copies of that one page. So we'll hand it out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My question is, Ms. Greuel, whether or not that was, this is just
Yes.
a true
my
and
motion.
accurate copy of the,
Yes.
of the motion. No? Okay. All right. This motion was introduced at a time that's, I guess, reflective of a concern of trying to control city costs.
Correct.
So, I get, the question would be whether or not this particular, whether or not you had the Moore Park Bridge project in mind in any way, shape, or form at the time that you signed this motion.
No.
Okay.
I don't know if that, prior to this, there had been, whether they had made the determination or not, and whether their claims were approved or not. I don't remember the timing.
Okay. All right. This is probably actually exhibit, off the record for a second. What exhibit number is this? No, this one we already introduced.
That would be,
This is the motion, the actual Moore Park Bridge motion.
I don't know, what does that say? Is that 10?
It'd be
10?
10.
Exhibit 10?
Yeah.
Okay, so could you, how about we look at Exhibit 10? Back on the record here,
Yep.
okay? This, as you earlier testified, was the motion that you had filed to provide some additional dollars for payment of expenses relating to the Moore Park Bridge project, correct?
It's regarding repaving Moore Park.
Repaving Moore Park. Okay. When you say repaving, specifically, do you recall what was being repaved?
Sure. This was, I guess originally, my recollection is that they originally only had enough money to repave just the portion in front of the bridge. We felt it was necessary, or that it would be much more cost efficient to repave from Laurel Canyon to Radford the whole street rather than just one little piece of it, and so we identified funds to do so.
And could you just briefly describe the circumstances leading up to your actual signing this motion and presenting this motion? Well, I mean, but why did you do it in February of '09, do you know?
I believe at the time was when they were about ready to repave the street, and came to us and had the conversation that it would be better for the street and others to have it paved from Laurel Canyon to, I believe, I don't know, to Carpenter.
And when you say they came to you?
I believe Bureau of Street Services
Bureau of Street Services.
came to my staff.
And you know on your staff with whom they dealt?
I don't know if it was Nancy Evan or Claire.
Who would have prepared
I would have
this?
assumed that, well, we usually ask the CLA, it's, I don't know who RCP is, but that's who would have prepared it. It might have been the CLA that help prepare the appropriate language to make the transfer of funds.
And the CLA refers to?
Chief Legislative Analyst.
And that would be the person, just briefly describe who or what the chief legislative analyst does?
Provide staff to the council
So you
as
would,
a whole.
So your staff would go to the,
Say we'd like to transfer this money and we need the appropriate language to do so.
and they draft the motion and you sign it?
Sometimes we do, sometimes they do. I don't know in this instance whether it was my office or it was the CLA or in concert.
Okay, so we're talking about part money from Proposition C, looks like 103,000. Part from Street Furniture Revenue Fund, 150,000. And what's the Street Furniture Revenue Fund, CD2? What is that?
It's funds that under the discretion of the council district.
Funds under the discretion of the council district. Is there any control over the discretion?
Council has to act on it.
But are there any legal limitations of which you're aware that limit the use of that the funds in the street
As it
furniture
says
regimen?
in the first sentence, the Street Furniture Fund can be used for curb and sidewalk improvements, community beautification, and transit-related projects, and other eligible projects of benefit to the community.
Okay, and is that that's the exclusive use, as far as you know?
That's as far as I know.
And what is the capital improvement program, 46,718?
I don't know if that's in street services. Does it say where it is under the accounts? I'm not 100% sure where that is located. I don't believe it's in the cities, in the council districts, I don't know. But that was identified to be able to assist us in repaving the street.
Do you know at the time how much you had in your street furniture revenue fund?
I do not.
What is the source of the monies for the street furniture revenue fund?
It's based on those street furniture programs that are put up in the district and the revenue from the advertisement that is related to that.
And what percentage of the advertising, this is advertising revenue that goes to the city from
Yes.
street furniture?
Yes.
And the general fund gets a certain percentage and the council district fund gets a certain percentage?
That's my recollection.
Do you recall the percentage?
No.
Is it accurate to say that the Moore Park Bridge project was a transit-related project? Is that a fair statement, in your view?
I believe it was based on the bridge.
So the answer is yes, that the Moore Park Bridge widening project was a transit-related project?
I believe it was both. It was shoring up the actual bridge.
Shoring up
As
the
well as
actual
widening.
bridge?
Yeah.
Okay, so is that, in your view, a transit-related project or a non-transit-related project?
The safety of the bridge?
The construction of the bridge? And
Well, you couldn't drive over it if it wasn't safe, so that would be transit.
okay, so your answer is yes?
Well, I'm not sure. Are you asking me the question related of whether or not this money can be spent for the transit-related projects?
Mhm.
Okay. This is for the repaving of Moore Park.
Well, I appreciate that. The repaving of Moore Park
Repaving of Moore Park.
is part of the construction of, or the
The
work that was done.
repaving of Moore Park would be there whether or not there was a bridge or not.
Correct.
This is about the repaving. It's not about the bridge construction.
Is it your testimony that the repaving of Moore Park was not part of the Moore Park Bridge widening project?
There is a correlation because the road was torn up
Mhm.
because of the bridge construction.
So therefore, the repaving of Moore Park was part of the construction of the Moore Park Bridge renovation project, was it not?
Again, I think you're mixing here apples and oranges of the bridge. The reconstruction of the bridge was related to the safety of the bridge. The paving of the street was related to the street needed to be repaved.
Is it your understanding,
They included money, I believe, in the actual project to repave the street, a portion of that. This allowed us to repave from Laurel Canyon to Carpenter.
the 150?
I believe the 150 and the 103, and I don't know if either of those were related specifically to the bridge project. The reason we did this is the bridge project was only related to that portion that was directly over the bridge for the cost of repaving. We believed that it should be repaved from Laurel Canyon to Carpenter, and identified the funding to extend that paving for the remainder of that area, and was an eligible expense under the street furniture revenue fund.
Mr. Weiss, it's now 12:30. I think we need to call it a day.
Okay. We'll respect Ms. Greuel's decision.
Proposed stipulation for this is volume 1. Propose that the court reports be provided for statutory duties original transcript, that the original be provided and prepared at the original after Mr. Lane calls receiving the transcript to review it, make any corrections that deems appropriate, signing under penalty of perjury, that those changes will then be provided to all counsel, that Mr. Langsfeld produced the original with changes upon request, and that in the absence of that, parties can use a certified copy with changes, assuming the transcript is signed by Ms. Greuel at the time of trial.
So agreed.
So stipulated.
So stipulated.
So stipulated.
Okay, this completes DVD number 2 and concludes the deposition testimony of Wendy Greuel. We are off the record at 12:01. Okay, good afternoon. My name is Frank Meyer, your videographer, and I represent Atkinson Baker, Inc. in Glendale, California. I'm not financially interested in this action, nor am I a relative or employee of any attorney or any of the parties. Today's date is April 20th, 2010. The time is 2:07 p.m. This deposition is taking place at City Hall East, Office of the Controller, 200 North Main Street, Suite 300, Los Angeles, California, 90012. This case number is BC 412715, entitled Gregory versus the City of Los Angeles. The deponent is Wendy Greuel. This is volume 2, and the deposition is being taken on behalf of the plaintiff. Your court reporter today is Faye Goldman from Atkinson Baker, Inc., and counsel will now please introduce themselves.
Noel Weiss for Plaintiff Mary Gregory.
Greg Rappaport on behalf of Jeffrey and Donnie West and the West Family Trust.
Heather Coleman for MCM Construction.
Deputy City Attorney Peter Langsfeld.
Okay, the court reporter will now please swear in the witness.
To solemnly state under penalty of perjury, the testimony about to give in this deposition will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes.
Ms. Greuel, this is a continuation of your deposition from March 31st. And it's important, I think, that, again, I don't want to take a lot of time in terms of the admonitions, but one of the more important ones is that because we're having it transcribed by a reporter, that we have audible response as opposed to nods of the head or that sort of thing.
Okay.
Did you have occasion since your last deposition to review any documents?
No.
Did you have occasion to speak with any individuals concerning the Moore Park Bridge project?
No.
Did you undertake any kind of a search of any of your files relative to the Moore Park Bridge project? Any files that you may have?
I'm sorry, did I take a look?
Did you undertake any kind of a search?
No.
Is there a reason for that?
I don't have any files currently in my possession as the city controller.
Did you speak with anybody from Mr. Krikorian's office about?
No.
Again, is there a reason for that?
You're asking for my deposition today about what I know and what I'm familiar with, so
Okay, so we're just going from your recollection.
Correct. I had no possession and no files in my possession as the council member. As we went over previously, my staff had any files.
Okay. Since your last deposition, I believe you testified that you didn't really recall any subsequent conversations with Gary Moore. You know who Mr. Moore is?
Yes.
Who is he?
He's a city engineer.
And was a city engineer at the time of the project?
Correct.
Have you had occasion to think about whether or not you have had any discussions with Mr. Moore
No.
following?
No.
Now, as I understand it, you didn't recall at your last deposition whether or not there was a council file on the Moore Park Bridge project that your office maintained. Is that correct?
I indicated I did not have a council, I did not have my own file, that my staff, I assumed, had files with correspondence, and the only files I had would have been the written correspondence that were generated with my signature.
So you do recall the existence of files that your staff may have had?
No, what I indicated is I assumed my staff had files on the particular case.
And what was your assumption based on?
Based on, as we went through previously, which is that they are professionals and that they would have material available to them on anything related to the case that they felt, or not the case, the actual issues in their files.
And was that because you had a specific protocol as to whether or not they were supposed to maintain files?
Mr. Rice, we went over this before. No, I did not have a specific protocol for them to how they kept their files.
Okay, I just wanted to give you a chance, Ms. Greuel, between March 31st and today, to whether or not you wanted to change your testimony
No.
in any way, shape, or form.
No. I told the truth the first time and tell the truth the second time.
You're fine.
Yes.
Okay, fair enough. Tell me the first conversation, if you can recall, that you had with Evan Roosevelt concerning the Moore Park Bridge project.
The first conversation, as I mentioned last time, was when I called Nancy Hernandez on the weekend that there was a problem and an issue that regarding the Moore Park Bridge and why was it happening. We went through that last time.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't recall a first conversation with Evan Roosevelt.
Okay, do you recall? Tell me, do you recall any conversation with Evan Roosevelt?
Yes, I spoke to him about the concerns about the Moore Park Bridge.
And what do you recall on more than one occasion?
Yes.
Okay. When was the first conversation?
I don't
with
recall
him?
when the first conversation was. I called him when I received emails about some of which you had provided to me in the last deposition, emails that I had received concerning damage that the neighbors felt they had received based on the construction at the Moore Park Bridge.
And what did you tell him?
I told him that I wanted him to look into it, that I wanted to see exactly what had happened, and for him to call and talk to the neighbors as well as talk to Bureau of Engineering.
And following that, do what? Report back to you?
Well, to figure out exactly the issue at hand at that time was why were they doing it on Sunday? How come they had not notified the neighborhood or the council office that they were doing this construction? And really a lot about the project that had been unknown to our office based on engineering, and the contractor had not informed us.
And, okay, so that was the first conversation.
Yeah.
You call that predated your letter to Mr. Moore of September 21st?
I believe so.
Okay.
I would assume so.
And what do you remember, if anything, about what Mr. Roosevelt's comments in response were?
To
Your directive to him to look into it.
I know that he went and talked to the neighbors. I know that he talked to Bureau of Engineering. And so our subsequent letter was in response to some of that information he had received from his conversations.
Okay, and how do you know that he talked to the neighbors in the Bureau of Engineering?
Because he told me he did.
In a subsequent conversation?
And honestly, I don't know how many conversations we had about it. I talked to my staff fairly regularly, or would see them at events where we would chat about issues that were of concern. So I don't know how many conversations I had with him, other than that this was an issue I wanted him to be on top of.
And beyond doing what you've just described, as far as information gathering, we'll call it generically information gathering, was Mr. Roosevelt assigned any other duties and responsibilities by you in connection with the Moore Park Bridge project?
Other than making sure that he could respond to the constituent complaints and to deal with it with Bureau of Engineering?
Yes.
No.
So, did you specifically empower him to act on your behalf in any way, shape, or form in dealing with the Bureau of Engineering with regard to the Moore Park Bridge project?
I empowered him to handle the problem and to come back to me or my chief of staff or district director if there were any issues that he needed assistance with as well.
Were there any such issues?
There was, related to, as we've gone over before, related to filing of claims, the process that they were going through, all of that, yes.
And when you say issues, what do you recall about the any communications that were made by Mr. Roosevelt to you as far as the filing of claims are concerned?
I don't remember if it was Mr. Roosevelt or Nancy or my chief of staff that indicated that the city attorney had advised them as to what, if they felt their homes were damaged by the action of the Moore Park Bridge, that here was the process in which how they would file those applications.
And what do you recall about that process as described to you?
That they were provided with the information, that we asked for an extension of the time in which they could file those, I don't know if it's whatever the process is, but they could file some documentation to the city. It was a claim, I guess you would call it.
And the they would be the homeowners, your constituents?
Correct.
And did your office request receiving copies of the claims?
I don't know if he did or not.
Did you recall ever directing him to ask that your office receive copies of the claims?
I did not direct him to. Again, my assumption is he would handle it appropriately, and the claims were going to the city attorney's office.
What experience did Mr. Roosevelt have in dealing with matters such as this? Dealing with these kinds of constituent complaints?
He dealt with constituent complaints every day.
What about constituent complaints involving construction projects, such as the Moore Park Bridge project?
I don't know if he had any other constituent complaints directly related to construction projects.
Okay, but you don't recall ever asking to receive copies of the constituent claims yourself?
I did not ask for copies of the constituent complaints.
Were you interested in finding out the specifics of the constituent complaints?
I was interested because I'd received emails about their complaints, but the process was that the city attorney and the Bureau of Engineering would be handling those complaints. Our office had no role or responsibility on the resolution of those
Why is that?
because they were claims.
So why would your office have no role or responsibility in connection with the resolution of claims?
Because that's the responsibility of the city attorney's office and the Bureau of Engineering.
So you, as far as the dollar amount that's involved in those claims, that's not something that you were the least bit concerned about learning?
I was not going to be the decision maker on those claims. I didn't have any experience as to the actual claims, how you would ascertain whether they were real or not real, how much the cost was associated with the construction, all that. That was not in our expertise. That was for the city attorney and the Bureau of Engineering to address.
Do you recall any discussion about the specific protocol on how the claims were going to be resolved or dealt with?
All I recall is that they had to file the claims, and then the city attorney and the Bureau of Engineering would review them. And when there was a timing issue, we asked that they extend the time so that homeowners would have the ability to file those claims.
And when you
That's
say
an
extend the
interesting-
time, could you be more specific? What do you mean by that?
I don't recall exactly what the timing was, but there was a certain time period in which you have to file a claim, and there was some confusion as to when that started, ended, and so we wanted to make sure the homeowners had full and ample opportunity and rights to be able to file those claims.
And who briefed you on that?
I don't recall.
Prior to this, did you have any independent knowledge of what the claims process is with regard to the city's protocol?
No.
So this was the first time in your career as a councilwoman you ever had citizens filing claims with the city?
That I'm aware of, yes.
Tell me about your concern as far as the need to get the Moore Park Bridge project moving. Do you have any concerns in that regard?
Moving, what do you mean?
In other
Moving?
words, well, are you aware, Ms. Greuel, that the project originally was, shall we say, engineered and planned back in 2002, 2003? You aware of that?
I don't know if they came to us and explained that to us again. Our knowledge was my knowledge of it was when they started, actually, I heard the hammering and that was occurring. That was when I became aware of it.
So prior to that time, you had undertaken no independent analysis or review of what was going on with the Moore Park Bridge project?
And we were involved and had been briefed on the Colfax and Tahunga Bridge.
When you say we, who are you referring to?
Me as a council member and my staff.
So and when did those briefings occur?
I think we chatted about it last time. It was probably in the beginning of my first year.
But there was never any discussion about the Moore Park Bridge project?
No.
Okay, tell me about the discussion that you recall concerning the Colfax Bridge project, your briefing on that.
Colfax Bridge was about the design and timing and funding for that particular bridge.
Okay, and when did you first become aware that there was going to be work done on the Colfax Bridge project?
Before I was elected and after I was sworn in.
And early in your term?
Correct.
Between that period of time and the time that the work on the Moore Park Bridge project began, did you have any briefings on Colfax Bridge project?
I believe we primarily talked about the design. That was the issue that had been brought up for the community.
And when would that have been, if you recall?
I don't recall. It was again in the first year.
First year.
Of my tenure.
So, between the first year of your tenure in 2007, let's say, did you personally undertake any action to push the city bureaucracy to move forward on either the Colfax, on the Colfax Bridge project?
I don't think I personally made any move other than after the bridge collapse in Minnesota, wherever it was. We asked them to look at all of the bridges to make sure that they were structurally sound and where were those that were at greatest risk. Colfax was one of those that was one of the greatest risk.
And was Moore Park also one of those?
Not that I'm aware of.
Other than Colfax, which other bridges do you recall as being the focus of your attention in terms of being at risk of collapse?
Colfax one was the one I was most aware of that had come out of, I think, in the original list, as I recall.
Did you ever inquire as to why Moore Park wasn't included? Just out of curiosity?
No, because as I indicated the last deposition and this deposition, Colfax and Tahunga and the Foothill Bridge were the ones that were the most, that the Bureau of Engineering spent time talking to us about. They did not talk to us about the Moore Park Bridge and any problems associated with the Moore Park Bridge.
And you never inquired as to why?
I have a lot of bridges that were in that district. So I'm not an engineer. The engineer would come to us and tell us which bridges needed to be repaired and why.
So they created a priority?
You'd have to ask them, but I assume that's what they did.
Well, I'm asking what they told you. When they're briefing you on Colfax and they're briefing you on Tahunga, was it? And Foothill was the third? They never said, okay, these are the three bridges that are in risk of collapse, and these are all the bridges in your district, and these are the ones that we're focusing on. They never did that?
Not that I recall.
Was Colfax number 1 on the list?
I believe so.
Okay, why didn't they start on Colfax first?
I don't know.
You never asked.
Again, I'll go back. The Moore Park Bridge was not on our radar screen. They had not come to us and talked about Moore Park Bridge. Colfax Bridge, as far as we knew, was the first bridge that they were going to act upon.
Did they say when they were going to act upon it?
Colfax?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
When?
A couple years ago, they had originally intended to do that.
And what happened?
Funding for that particular bridge, building community consensus on the design, and ensuring that all of the lights were adjusted to reflect the closure of that bridge for a long period of time.
So when you were briefed on the Colfax Bridge, again, do you have any kind of a time frame on that? Other than what you, I'm not talking about the beginning of your term, I'm talking about specifically after the Minnesota Bridge collapsed. When was that, about 2006?
I don't remember.
Okay, so but whatever point in time that was, from that point forward, you did have a concern about bridges collapsing, correct?
Yeah, those that were at risk.
Those
Yes.
were at risk. And that concern translated into a briefing to you by the Bureau of Engineering of those bridges that were at risk of collapse and that would need some reinforcement work, correct?
Correct. I don't know if they would have used the word collapsing, but that were a risk of not being structurally sound, and that we should upgrade them.
And this is something that was initiated by you, correct? Because of your concern after the Minnesota Bridge
Correct.
collapse. So when they briefed you about Colfax, did you ever inquire as to when the work on Colfax was going to be bid out?
Yes.
And what do you recall them
I don't
saying?
recall.
Do you recall when, whether or not it was ever represented to you that the work on the Colfax Bridge was going to start at a specific date and time?
Again, they indicated on several occasions that they were going to try and start the bridge, but they did not for a variety of reasons based on, as I mentioned earlier, cost, consensus on the design, and the corresponding lights that needed to be changed.
All right, cost, when you say cost, what do you mean? The money was not there to do the bridge?
No, as I recall, there was federal dollars that were coming in for all of the bridges, and it ultimately was not as much as they had originally anticipated for the bridges in the city.
In total?
In total.
So therefore, there were monies out there. And so what about Proposition C monies?
I don't recall as to where all the sources of money they were going to use.
Okay, but they were, was there a concern about what would happen to the traffic if they closed the Colfax Bridge for an extended period of time?
Yes, I indicated that earlier.
Okay, and could you describe those concerns in some greater detail?
Well, there would be greater traffic on Tahunga, Laurel Canyon, other streets, Moore Park. So they wanted to have left-hand turn signals at those locations to accommodate the traffic. Additionally, at Colfax and Moore Park.
So when they talked about the Colfax Bridge, is it fair to say that some traffic, there would be a heavier use of the Moore Park Bridge because of the closure of the Colfax Bridge?
I think they'd say Moore Park.
They would say Moore Park. Okay, so is it also fair to say that they would have to align the work on Colfax to correlate with the need to divert traffic on Moore Park? To divert traffic to be able to use the Moore Park Bridge when the Colfax Bridge was down?
Again, they never mentioned the Moore Park Bridge. They mentioned Moore Park, Laurel Canyon, Colfax, Tahunga.
When work started on the Moore Park Bridge project, you remember that, right?
I do.
Because you were awakened by the vibration,
I
correct?
don't know if I was awakened, but I heard it, yes.
You heard it. Did you feel it?
No.
You didn't feel it. Had they set a schedule for when they were going to start the Colfax Bridge project?
don't recall.
You recall giving any direction at all with regard to the timing of when the Moore Park Bridge project was going to be constructed versus when the Colfax Bridge project was going to be constructed?
Because I was unaware of the Moore Park Bridge construction, it didn't impact the Colfax discussion prior to that.
So in your mind, there was no interrelationship between the construction on the Moore Park Bridge project and the construction on the Colfax Bridge project. Is that your testimony?
No.
Okay.
My testimony is, you asked me about whether or not I thought when the initial conversations with the Colfax Bridge that they were considering the Moore Park Bridge activity. We were not made aware of the Moore Park Bridge. After the Moore Park Bridge became available, yes, that had an impact on whether or not Colfax, I believe, was what the timing would be.
And what, describe the impact on the timing?
I think just there was only one lane, I believe, on Moore Park during a portion of the time of the construction of the Moore Park Bridge.
So how does that...
One lane on both sides.
So what's the relationship between the Moore Park Bridge project, once you found out about it, and the timing of the Colfax Bridge project? Is there any relationship there as far as you were concerned?
Yes, based on that traffic that was going to be moving to Moore Park would be that having to move from Colfax to now Moore Park would be impacted by the traffic going on in Moore Park.
Okay, but the Moore Park Bridge was first, correct?
Correct. So but here's the point, is the Moore Park Bridge, the Colfax Bridge wasn't going to be started, and this again occurred after the Moore Park Bridge was constructed, until that, I believe, until that was completed.
And why was that?
Because there was going to be more traffic on Moore Park than there when the Colfax Bridge was being constructed. And because the Moore Park Bridge only had one lane, allowed only one lane on each side, that you couldn't have increased traffic, I believe, on Moore Park while it was being constructed.
So it's fair to say you couldn't have both bridges closed at the same time, correct?
Yeah.
So
That would have been easier to say in the beginning, yes, that's it. You could not have had them both closed at the same time.
So the choice, apparently without your knowledge, was to start on Moore Park first before Colfax. It's apparently the way it went down, right?
It's apparently the way it went down, yes. I don't know why their reasoning was, why they chose
And you
to do
never
Moore
asked?
Park.
And you never asked why their reasoning was the way that it was? Why they chose Moore Park
No.
first?
No.
That didn't cross your mind to ask?
While it was under construction?
Mm-hmm.
No.
Okay. Did you ever consider alternative ways of resolving the claims of your constituents, short of forcing them into a situation where they would have to file a lawsuit? Some kind of alternative dispute resolution process. Did you ever consider that?
Yes.
Okay, tell me what...
We asked, because we were not responsible for the claims, we asked the city attorney and the Bureau of Engineering what was the process, and was there any other process other than filing a lawsuit that could resolve the issue. And they said they had to file a claim.
Okay, and the claim had to be processed.
Correct.
Describe, Ms. Greuel, if you, to the extent that you can recall, your understanding of what the process consisted of in evaluating each constituent claim.
I'm unaware of the process.
So you never asked specifically about what the process consisted of?
I just knew there was a process for the claim for the city attorney and the Bureau of Engineering, who are the experts on that, to resolve the issues.
So you just left it to them to take care of? Because it wasn't your job in your view, correct?
I would paraphrase it differently, but
Okay,
I would
how would
say
you paraphrase
I would
it?
paraphrase it that they are the responsible entities. We asked them to review the claims of our constituents and the concerns that they had, and for them to do that at the best of their ability.
What, if you recall, was the involvement, if any, of MCM. You know who I'm referring to when I say MCM? Who's MCM?
I think it's the construction company that was doing it, if I believe.
Okay.
But answer is no, I had no involvement with them whatsoever.
Okay. So you didn't have any involvement. What was the extent of your knowledge of the MCM's involvement in the process of trying to resolve the claims, if any?
I was not involved in the processing of the claims.
So you never directed the Bureau of Engineering to get MCM involved with trying to confront and resolve these claims?
I asked the Bureau of Engineering and the City Attorney's Office to process the claims as they saw fit in whatever process they used.
Okay. Did you ever inquire as to whether or not there was a way to get the constituent claims taken care of?
Oh, from the beginning, we wanted to see them try to resolve the constituent claims.
Them being who?
City Attorney and Bureau of Engineering.
And MCM?
If that was who the contract was with and who was the responsible party, I don't know.
Okay,
That was
so
not, I was not intricately involved in the resolution of the claims.
But your staff was out there gathering information, correct? During the time that the claims were submitted?
I think my staff was out there giving them, the constituents, the information necessary for them to file their claims.
And what about after the claims were filed? Was your staff involved in keeping the constituents informed about what was going on?
I don't know if they may have given them timing. I don't think they would have. I don't know how they communicated with them during that period of time of anything particular in each of their claims.
So you never asked? And who on your staff, was it Mr. Roosevelt
Mr.
primarily?
Roosevelt.
Anybody else?
Not that I'm aware of.
So, Mr. Roosevelt, did you ever ask him what kind of feedback he was getting from your constituents about the claims as they were being processed?
I don't think we were involved in the, once we encouraged them here's how to file the claims, here's what you need to do to file the claims, and to extend the time for them to file the the claims. I don't believe we were engaged in any interaction between them and engineering and the City Attorney's Office.
But what about your communication with your constituents about this? You didn't have yourself any direct communication with your constituents, correct?
Well, I did early on, but I don't believe in the claims process I did.
Okay, but you relied on your staff?
Correct.
And your staff's directive was to work with the constituents to try to get the claims resolved?
Correct.
And did your staff report back to you on, and specifically Mr. Roosevelt, report back to you on the nature and the extent of his efforts in accomplishing that objective?
I mean, I know he kept me informed and let me know when the claims were denied. I don't know if there was correspondence between the time he encouraged them to file the claims, they were filed, and the disposition of it.
Was there ever any thought given to trying to find the money to take care of the claims through Proposition C monies or otherwise?
Well, the role of the council office is not to get in the middle of the claims and make a determination whether the claims were appropriate or not. That's the responsibility of the city attorney and the Bureau of Engineering.
Okay, that's as per the way that you saw the role in the council office, as you define the role, correct? Is there anything written that says the council office has no involvement in connection with the resolution of these claims? You aware of any rule?
Mr. Weiss, I'm going to object. The claims were resolved.
Okay, are you aware of any rule, Ms. Greuel, that precludes the council office from being more directly involved in the resolution of constituent claims of this nature?
What would you suggest?
Well, again, respectfully here, I get to ask the questions and rather than answer them. But
there's no rule.
There's no rule. Okay, so it's a matter of your judgment in terms of whether or not, how proactive you want to be in terms of getting these claims resolved. And is that correct?
No,
okay.
That is not correct.
All right, what's incorrect about it?
I was proactive in ensuring that my constituents had the opportunity to file the claims. I'm not an engineer and I'm not an attorney. So I do not believe it is the appropriate role for an elected official to insert myself in something that is a legal matter.
Did you ever communicate to your constituents that belief?
No.
Did you ever direct Mr. Roosevelt to communicate to your constituents that belief?
No.
Okay, what I want to do, I think we left off Exhibit 12, so let's just do we'll call this 13. Okay, here you go.
Thank
I
you.
learned how to the rules.
This Exhibit 13 oops, my error. This is for you guys. Okay, Exhibit 13 is an undated email. Looks like to Evan Roosevelt. It's unclear who, CC Nancy Hernandez. It's unclear, as I say, the date. Do you recall ever seeing this document before today, Ms. Greuel?
I don't recall.
And again, so we're clear, is it likely that this email would have found its way into a, for want of a better term, Moore Park Bridge file that your office had kept?
It may have been on our, I think as we discussed before, on the computer file, if that would have been kept.
But those computer files aren't preserved for any extended period of time, correct?
I don't know how long they keep them.
But there is a period of time when they don't keep them anymore unless your office either downloads a copy or in
If
other
you say
words.
so, I'm not familiar with
You're
their
not familiar,
copy.
okay. All right, in going through this, again, it looks like it's from Evan Roosevelt, since that's the signatory line. The second paragraph begins, it says, as I'm sure you know, the claims submitted to the city have been referred to the contractor MCM Construction. Do you recall Mr. Roosevelt ever telling you that the claims were submitted to MCM Construction?
No.
Do you recall Mr. Roosevelt ever telling you about any conversations he may have had with anybody from MCM concerning the resolution of your constituent claims?
I don't.
Okay, it says, according to the contract with the city, MCM must resolve all claims prior to completion of the project. So they have good cause to move quickly as well. In my conversations with Mr. Nichols, he did not indicate that they see this as a priority.
He did.
Or he did indicate, I'm sorry, that they see this as a priority and want to move on this ASAP. Do you recall any conversation with Mr. Roosevelt where he communicated to you MCM's concern about wanting to move this along?
No.
Were you aware of any protocol or dynamic by which MCM would be involved in the resolution of the claims?
I don't remember.
Do you know where Mr. Roosevelt got the idea that MCM must resolve all claims prior to completion of the project?
I do not, other than what he said according to the contract with the city.
So as you sit here today, you don't have any recollection of Mr. Roosevelt talking to you about his conversations with MCM or anything about the resolution of these claims. Is that correct?
You combined a lot there.
Okay. As you sit here today, do you have any specific recollection about Mr. Roosevelt talking to you about his discussions with MCM about MCM's direct involvement in evaluating and resolving the claims?
I do not.
Were you ever made aware that Mr. Nichols was going to come and look at the houses that of your constituents where there was the alleged damages?
I do know that there was going to be someone who was visiting the home. I I don't know if I knew who specifically that was. I think I assumption it was building and safety that would go out, or engineering.
Did you ever make your intentions known that you wanted Bureau of Engineering to go out and look at your constituents' homes?
In the beginning, yes.
Okay. Did you, and to whom did you make known those desires?
Well, Evan and I spoke about when the original complaints came in, and that they would have someone go out and look at it.
And were they going to make any written reports back to you concerning the results of those inspections?
They did not provide any written reports to me
Do you know
directly.
if they, okay, did they provide any reports to you indirectly through your staff?
No.
Do you recall ever looking at any detailed file on the Moore Park Bridge project yourself?
No, we went over this again. No,
Okay,
I did
all right, I
not.
just want to make sure. Just want to make sure. Okay, now there's a time frame here that Mr. Roosevelt refers to. He says, the next step is Mr. Nichols will make appointments with each of you and will perform additional inspections with their expert within the next 2 weeks. After that, he indicated, it will take another 2 to 3 weeks for them to resolve the claims with their reinsurer. Do you recall any thought that you ever gave to the satisfaction of your constituent claims by way of the payment of insurance monies?
As far as, I mean, I wasn't aware of their conversation with MCM Construction. However, my understanding is they were filing the claims with the city. And they were having the conversations with the city. Now, that they were also having conversations, clearly, as it's stated here, with MCM.
Of which you were unaware?
Correct.
Did you ever give any thought to whether or not the claims of your constituents could be paid from insurance that MCM had?
I was unaware of the contract, just what was the part of the contract, whether or not they had insurance or not insurance. Again, this was based on the city attorney and the Bureau of Engineering responding to the claims.
Okay. You never asked, correct, about these details?
No.
Okay. All right. Number 4, I want to show you to be marked as number 14. This is an email that does have a date, March 2nd, 2009. It's from, for the record,
Thank you.
What did I give you? Let me see. Wrong one. This is it. This is an email dated March 2nd, 2009. It's a forwarded message from Jim D'Antona to various identified individuals with a CC to Lisa Sarkin. Were you aware, Ms. Greuel, that Jim D'Antona had any involvement with the Moore Park Bridge project in terms of dealing with your constituents on that?
I don't recall. I mean, we had a team approach of people helping one another, so clearly he was involved.
Did he ever communicate with you directly about his involvement on your office's behalf in connection with the Moore Park Bridge project?
I don't recall. It may have been in a staff meeting or others. I don't recall.
All right, when you say it may have been in a staff meeting, what do you mean? In other words, is it possible that, again, we went over this before, you're saying you don't have a specific recollection about Mr. D'Antona communicating with you directly about what he was doing in his dealings with your
Again, I
constituent?
don't recall. As I mentioned in my previous deposition, Jim D'Antona and Dale Thrush frequently were engaged in issues in various parts of my community and working with the district-specific staff, i.e. Evan Roosevelt.
But it wouldn't have been a situation where you would say to Jim, keep me apprised about what you're doing on Moore Park Bridge project or anything like that?
I don't recall. Again, this
All
was an issue that I was personally concerned about, and that they would keep me abreast every now and then of what the status was.
Okay, it says that I, referring to Jim D'Antona in paragraph 2, spoke with the Bureau of Engineering, and they are tentatively scheduled this week to meet with the management of the contractor of the bridge project, MCM, to discuss how we may resolve your claims. So the decision to communicate with the Bureau of Engineering, that was as per whose directive from your office?
I don't know if that was mine, Nancy's, Evans, Jim's, to talk to the Bureau of Engineering.
Okay, you don't have a specific recollection of telling him to do that, to telling Jim D'Antona to call the Bureau of Engineering?
I don't have a specific recollection.
All right, the next sentence says the councilwoman, that's you, right?
Correct.
The councilwoman has asked the Bureau of Engineering for the city to withhold final payment to MCM. You recall yourself asking anyone at the Bureau of Engineering to withhold payment from MCM?
I didn't ask personally anyone in the Bureau to do that.
Did you tell anybody on your staff to talk to the Bureau of Engineering and give them that directive?
I don't know if I gave them specific direction on that. It may have been in a briefing on where are we on the Colfax Bridge, on the Moore Park Bridge, and how are we doing on the claims. And my staff may have said at that time, well, they're about ready to finish the contract, we have concerns, and so the conversation, it sounds like from this email, I don't recollect any differently, that we discussed the fact that they should resolve this issue before the final payment.
Okay, but as you sit here today, you don't have a specific recollection of directing anybody at the Bureau of Engineering, either yourself or through your staff, to withhold payment pending the resolution of these claims?
I don't have a specific recollection, but I believe what Jim wrote there is accurate, if we had that conversation at the time.
And why do you believe it's accurate? Because he doesn't lie?
I trust my staff.
Yeah, okay. But you don't have a specific recollection of the amounts of the claims of your constituents as of March 2nd, 2009, correct?
Correct.
And you don't have any specific recollection of discussing alternative means or methods by which their claims could be satisfied short of a lawsuit?
We asked in every instance, as I've indicated from the beginning, that we wanted the Bureau of Engineering and the City Attorney to do everything they could to address the claims of my constituency, whichever way they possibly could do that.
But I'm asking for specifics as opposed to generalities. And the specifics relate to how that objective can be accomplished, Ms. Greuel. So I'm asking whether or not we dug a little bit deeper and went into the specifics of how the objective can be accomplished. Source of payment, methods of payment, ways of resolving short of litigation, alternative dispute resolution mechanism, things of that nature. Do you recall any specific discussions with anybody concerning how your professed objective can be accomplished?
I asked my staff to look at every possible option to resolve that issue.
But you don't recall them coming back to you with specific answers, do you?
I remember them coming back to me saying the only two options after the claims were denied was for them to file a lawsuit.
Okay. Now the next sentence says, I, again referring to Mr. D'Antona, have had a chance to speak with the city attorney regarding a possible tolling agreement. while we go through some sort of dispute resolution or mediation process. Now, does that sentence refresh your recollection at all about any discussions that you may have had with your staff concerning alternative ways of solving this problem short of litigation?
I had read that paragraph before I answered the question, which was the fact that I asked them to use every means possible in which to address it. It came down to the point where they said their only option left was filing a lawsuit. I don't know when that was said, whether that was before this, after this, at any point in time.
So you just accepted that as a fact. Did you ever ask why that there were no other alternatives
I
available?
asked my staff to continue to go back and push to see exactly what our options were, yes.
But did you ever ask why that litigation was the sole alternative, and that these alternatives discussed in this email were not viable alternatives?
Mr. Weiss, you're moving really, really close to attorney-client communication and attorney-work
Subject to,
product.
yeah. Subject to, I'm not asking you, so we're clear, I'm not asking you for specific discussions you may have had with your attorney, notwithstanding the fact that these kinds of emails may constitute a waiver. But putting that aside, I'm talking about discussions with your staff. And so with regard to...
I'll repeat my response.
Okay.
Mr. Weiss. My goal was, always had been, has been, continues to be, that I wanted them to address the claims of my constituents in any means possible. And that's what I instructed my staff to do.
Okay. And I'm, again, less concerned with your instructions at this point, Ms. Greuel, as I'm more concerned with when you got the feedback from your staff.
I got the feedback from my staff, and they indicated that the city attorney had said the only option we have available to provide in this last point in time is for them to file a lawsuit.
And you never asked why. That's my question.
And what I'm saying to you is that is the city attorney's opinion, who represents the city of Los Angeles.
My question is, did you ever ask why?
Yes, we asked why, and they said this is the only option you have available.
But you never asked why that's the only option. Did you? Did you ever ask that?
Of the city attorney, Mr. Weiss?
Yeah, or of anybody.
Well, no, it makes a big difference on who she would ask and the opinion that was given.
Well, I'm not asking for the opinion, which she's already testified to in any event, which may constitute a waiver. I'm just asking, I'll let that go. I'm just asking whether or not she asked the simple question, why? That's all.
Of my staff.
Yes.
I asked them, did you ask the city attorney if there's any other option? And they said, no, that is the process. I did not ask them why the city attorney would give us any other advice than what they did.
That's the question. That's all that I want to know. Okay, next. Okay, that was what, 14? So we'll go to 15 now. Here's 15. Okay, this is a email dated March 4, 2009 from Mary Gregory. Looks like I'm assuming Jim is Jim D'Antona, but that's an assumption on my part, admittedly. Do you recall ever seeing this email, Ms. Greuel?
No.
Do you recall whether or not Mr. D'Antona, in a staff meeting or otherwise, ever communicated to you about your constituents' concerns after this March 4th date concerning getting their claims dealt with by the city?
I'm sorry.
Did you recall any discussion with Mr. D'Antona specifically about constituent concerns involving the resolution of their claims in relating to their damaged property
And as I indicated, I asked them to keep me as updated as they can on what the process was and where we were. So I'm assuming during that period of time, Jim, since this looks like to Jim, that he was engaged and would have kept us up to speed.
Okay. Did you have staff meetings every week?
We would try to.
Are those calendared anywhere? Would that be on somebody's calendar, the
Assume
existence
they
of?
would be on our calendar and the previous calendar in the council office.
And do you recall any staff meetings at this time in March of 2009 where there would have been discussions about constituent claims involving the Moore Park Bridge project?
We met every week and would get updates on a variety of issues.
And would Mr. D'Antona attend the meetings?
Usually.
Would Mr. Roosevelt attend the meetings?
No, not necessarily.
Who else would attend the meetings?
Primarily my legislative staff downtown, in addition to Nancy Hernandez, my district director.
Do you recall a sense of urgency or concern during this period of time in the staff meetings about resolving these constituent claims on the Moore Park Bridge project?
Again, I will repeat myself. This was an important issue for us to try and resolve their claims. So if there was a new update or information, it would be shared at that meeting if it was on the agenda or the staff member was present.
Okay, but again, you're not testifying from a specific recollection, are you?
Correct.
You don't have a specific recollection of it actually being discussed at any staff meetings, correct?
No, I know it was discussed at staff meetings. I just can't, I have a staff meeting if I had a staff meeting every single week and we would talk about council agenda items, my schedule, all of that, it was one of many, so we had a lot of those meetings.
But my question, Ms. Greuel, is whether or not you have a specific recollection as you sit here today discussing constituent claims about the Moore Park Bridge project at any of your staff meetings in March of 2009?
I don't recall the timeline, if that was in March of 2009 or February or April, whatever the date may be.
Okay, so you do recall some specific discussion about Moore Park Bridge claims in one or more staff meetings?
I indicated to you previously that we had conversations about the status of the Moore Park Bridge, the claims, the process of them presenting to the city. Yes.
And do you recall ever telling your staff to tell the constituents that their claims are not going to be taken care of except via litigation?
I told them to keep the constituents informed as much as possible with any information they had.
As much as possible with any information they had with regard to what?
Status, how to file the claim, what was happening.
Any concern about, okay, well, fair enough. Let's see, so we'll go to 16. This is an email dated March 9, 2009. It looks like an email chain, actually. The bottom, it's indicates that it was sent by Evan Roosevelt. It says, this is addressed to Jeff Wess. Hi all, I just wanted to touch base to share some next steps that we will be taking in regards to the recent denial letters that many, if not all of you, have received from both the contractor and the city attorney. Do you recall being advised in a staff meeting that the city attorney and/or the contractor have denied your constituent claims?
Yes.
And what do you recall about your response to that, Ms. Greuel?
My response was, did they do a further review? Is there any room for discussion? Any other things that they can do to resolve it?
Did you ask your staff the amount of the claims?
No.
And again, as per your prior testimony, you never asked for copies of the claims.
No.
As far as you know, your staff never reviewed copies of the claims.
I have no idea.
You never asked them whether they did or they didn't, correct? Review the claims. Did you ever ask your staff whether they themselves reviewed any of your constituent claims?
There are actual forms?
The actual claims that were submitted that this email says
I
were
did
denied.
not ask them if they had reviewed them.
Did you ever ask your staff to summarize the claims for you?
No,
Why?
because the claims were being sent to the city attorney and the city engineer for their review.
Why would that preclude you from knowing what the content and the specifics of the claims were?
Well, I had seen and heard earlier complaints of what they had, cracking and the other things that they had identified.
But you had no idea the amounts of the claims, correct?
To me, the amount of the claims was not an issue. It was about whether the claims were directly related to the cause of the Moore Park Bridge.
Mr. Weiss, you're asking for a legal conclusion. It's inappropriate, particularly since you know that the claims are not supposed to include demand amounts. And you know that, or you should.
The fact of the matter is, Mr. Langsford, the claims did include demand amounts.
They're not supposed to include demand amounts, and you know that.
The fact of the matter is that they did, and that Ms. Greuel's constituents did have dollar amounts in mind. And the point of the question is to inquire whether Ms. Greuel was concerned enough about her constituents to even ask whether or not what the specifics of their claims were.
That question's
And the
argumentative.
amounts.
I'm going to ask Ms. Greuel not to answer that question. That's not a question, it's an inappropriate question. Please don't even answer that.
Can I answer one set? This one set?
If you
My
want to.
concern was about ensuring the constituents that if they filed a claim, that it be looked at and it be treated fairly, whether it was a lot of money or a small amount of money. It was the fact of whether or not the Moore Park Bridge construction caused that or not. It made no difference to me whether or not a claim was small or large. It was whether or not it actually happened and the constituents could resolve that. That was my
So your concern was whether their claims were caused by the Moore Park Bridge. Is that what you're saying?
My concern was to address their issues as to whether it was caused by that or not.
And was there a question in your mind that their claims may not have been caused by the Moore Park Bridge construction?
I am not an engineer. I wouldn't be able to respond to that.
Did you ever ask anybody whether or not they thought that their...
I asked Bureau of Engineering and the city attorney to address that, yes.
But you never got any response, correct?
They did it through the claims.
But you never got a response directly to your question and your now professed concern as to whether or not the claims were caused.
My now professed concern?
What your your concern that you're testifying about today.
Correct.
That as to whether or not the claims that were being asserted were actually caused by the work on the Moore Park Bridge project.
I asked the city attorney and the Bureau of Engineering to determine that fact. That's why I encouraged my constituents to file the claims in the first place. Because if in fact it was the cause, I wanted them to file the complaint.
And what efforts did you undertake, Ms. Greuel, to, other than what you've already testified to ascertain the answer to your concern about whether their damage claims were caused by work on the Moore Park Bridge project?
The process was they've had to file the complaints for that determination to be made.
That was not my question.
That's my answer.
Okay, well, good. Now, maybe let's try it again.
Mr. Weiss.
Yes. It's non-responsive, Mr. Langsfield, to the question.
I have a broader objection.
Okay, what's your broader objection?
This deposition has been going on for an hour. As far as I understand your client's lawsuit, she's suing the city for alleged damage to her home caused by construction. Nothing you've asked during this deposition has anything to do with that claim. Nothing. So why Ms. Greuel did or did not do something has got absolutely nothing to do with the lawsuit. Your client either has a claim or she doesn't. And whether or not Ms. Greuel was actively concerned about how that claim was resolved is irrelevant to your client's lawsuit and claim.
Okay, that's your position. You're entitled to your position. I'm entitled to inquire as far as Ms. Greuel's knowledge with regard to the claim, how it was, and how it's handled is directly relevant to items that can lead to the discovery of admissible evidence.
But the claim was resolved, Mr. Weiss.
Well, not, again.
Not to your satisfaction, maybe, but it was resolved.
Well,
It was denied.
Again, moving forward, next sentence, moving forward, we will be asking both the city attorney, this is Mr. Roosevelt again, moving forward, we, and I assume the we must mean the council office. That's an assumption. We'll ask Ms. Greuel whether or not she reads it the same way. Moving forward, we will be asking both the city attorney and the contractor's insurance company to re-examine their positions. Now, do you recall, Ms. Greuel, whether or not you specifically asked anybody on your staff to contact the insurance company of MCM to see whether or not your constituents' claims could be resolved with the insurance company?
When we found out they were denied by the city, that we had a conversation about asking them to review it and to see if there's anything else they could do to address the constituents' concerns.
Did you tell them to, did you tell anybody in your staff to write to your constituents to communicate that thought to them?
As I indicated before, I told my staff to keep the constituents informed as much as possible about what the status was.
And what follow-up did you undertake to make sure that that directive was carried out?
Mr. Weiss, as I've indicated before, when I instruct my staff and talk to my staff, my assumption is they are professionals and they would do as I asked.
Okay, let's see. The next in order is 17.
Oh, give back to her anyways, okay.
Yeah, I don't want to do that again. I'll leave that in there. Okay, I'm going to, this is plaintiff 17. It's a letter dated August 31st from John Koo, who is the, looks like Group Manager, Bureau of Engineering, Bridge Program. Have you seen, prior to today, Ms. Greuel, have you ever seen this letter?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay. It's directed to MCM. It's dated August 31st, 2007. Do you think by August 31st, 2007, you were aware that work was going to commence on the Moore Park Bridge project?
Yes.
And why is your answer yes?
Because I believe they started construction prior to that.
Okay. The first, there's two bullet points in this letter in the middle. First bullet point says, the city is directing MCM to accelerate and complete all foundation and abutment wall work in the channel before November 1st, 2007. Were you, at some point in time, did you ever become aware of a directive by the city to complete the foundation and abutment work before November 1st, 2007?
I don't remember any specific date.
Okay. Next sentence. This stems from our Council District 2 direction that due to traffic impact concerns, work for the Moore Park Bridge may not parallel the schedule of nearby Colfax Bridge planned for the start of construction next summer. You were yourself giving any directive that there be no delay in the construction of the Moore Park Bridge project?
I am aware that we did not want to have Moore Park and Colfax being constructed at the same time.
It's not my question. Well, let's answer that question. Did your office, and that would be you, ever give specific direction that work on the Moore Park Bridge project had to be accelerated because of a concern, for whatever reason, The work had to be
I
accelerated.
answered the question before. I was aware that we did not want to have Moore Park and Colfax at the same time.
Well, okay, you didn't want them, and when did you come to the determination that you didn't want to have them at the same time?
I don't recall.
Okay, do you recall giving any directive to the Bureau of Engineering that work on the Moore Park Bridge project was to be accelerated?
No.
Were you aware that MCM had advised that work on the Moore Park Bridge project be postponed?
Postponed when?
Back when the work
In
was
its
planned?
original?
In 2007. At this point, during this time frame, in 2007, were you aware of that
That the
the
project be postponed?
that the contractor MCM wanted to postpone work on the Moore Park Bridge project? Were you aware of that?
No, as I indicated before, we were not made aware of the plans and the dates and starts of the Moore Park Bridge.
Okay, but you also testified that as of this date, you had become aware.
No, I was assuming that the Moore Park Bridge date, I don't recall the date of the Moore Park Bridge being when it started in that Sunday, whatever date it was. My assumption is when I read this, was the city's directing to accelerate and complete all foundation and abutment, that they were already in process of the Moore Park Bridge.
And again, your testimony was and is that the first you ever heard of any work being done on the Moore Park Bridge project was the day that you heard the noise when they started working on the bridge. That was the first time, right?
That I was made aware of it, yes.
Okay. So after having been made aware of it, whatever date that was, do you recall giving a directive to the Bureau of Engineering that work on the Moore Park Bridge be accelerated so as to be completed by November 1st, 2007, as far as foundation and abutment wall work?
No.
Do you recall giving your office giving any direction at all with regard to the Moore Park Bridge project work schedule?
No.
Anybody on your staff authorized to give that direction in your name, as far as you knew?
All I'm aware is that I knew that the Moore Park Bridge, Colfax Bridge, that if they were both at the same time, would cause traffic problems.
Okay. So therefore, they couldn't be worked on simultaneously.
That's my understanding, yes.
And you also testified that you were aware generally of an effort by the city to start work on the Colfax Bridge project at some point in time that you can't recall as you sit here today, right?
That is correct.
But you didn't know that they were working on the Moore Park Bridge project or planning to work on the Moore Park Bridge project.
Mr. Weiss, I have on numerous occasions indicated to you that I was unaware of when or what the Moore Park Bridge construction was going to happen.
Did you ever ask your staff, Ms. Greuel, when they became aware that work was going to start on the Moore Park Bridge project?
As I've indicated before in my previous deposition, it was when I called my district office staff member, who then called to check on engineering. Subsequently, we sent a letter indicating that we had not been informed of the Moore Park Bridge, that we were particularly aware that the outreach that had occurred on Colfax had been extensive, and we had participated in what was going to happen to the Colfax Bridge. None of that happened on the Moore Park Bridge.
And none of your staff ever communicated to you that they were aware of what was going on, even though you personally may not have been aware? Is it your testimony that as far as you knew, none of your staff was aware before that Sunday that you first heard the noise on the Moore Park Bridge? None of your staff was aware of what was going on with Moore Park before that time. Is that your testimony?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Let's see, let's go to Next would be number
We have
18.
about 15 minutes.
Yeah, that's fine. This is a page from the mayor's budget, 2006-2007, refers to Proposition C, Anti-Gridlock Transit Improvement Fund. My question on this, Ms. Greuel, is whether or not, as far as you know, any Proposition C funds could be used or could have been used to resolve the claims of your constituents for damage to their houses as a result of the work on the Moore Park Bridge project.
My concern was not the source of funds, it was the actual claims. If the constituents were supposed to have those funds and to be reimbursed, then wherever the funds had to come from, they had to come from.
Did you ever have any doubt in your mind as to whether the damage to the homes was caused by work on the Moore Park Bridge project?
I'm going to object to calls for legal conclusion. There's no foundation. Please don't answer the question.
Okay. You testified earlier that, well, you just testified that your concern wasn't over the amount of the claims, but whether or not the claims were viable, were compensable, correct?
Correct.
And you left it to the city attorney and the Bureau of Engineering to make that determination.
Correct.
Okay. And beyond that, it was a matter of just communicating to the people, your constituents, what was happening with the resolution of those claims, correct?
Well, not only the resolution, but asking the city attorney and city engineer to work towards resolution.
Do you recall, and again, just so we're clear, because we did cover this before and I don't want to cover it again, other than to just confirm that following your September 21st, 2007 letter to Gary Moore, I don't know if you want to see it again. Let's take a look at that again.
I generally remember what it was, so
Okay.
go ahead.
This would be Exhibit 1 to your deposition. Following this letter having
Yes.
been sent, you never did any follow-up with Mr. Moore to inquire whether or not the vibrations of which your constituents were complaining were caused by work on the Moore Park Bridge project, correct? You never followed up with Mr. Moore to inquire whether or not the constituent claims were the result of work on the Moore Park Bridge project.
I asked him to look into that. Yes, that was my
That was this
issue.
letter.
Yes.
That was the point of this letter,
That
correct?
is correct. That is the point of my letter.
What I'm asking is, Ms. Greuel, is the follow-up. Did you ever hear back from him on that?
What my understanding from Mr. Moore is at that time they had conversations with the construction company and did not believe that it was, but again, there was question about that, so that's why we asked them to file the claims and to participate in that.
Okay, and did that response from Mr. Moore come in an oral conversation, or was it in
Who's
writing?
my staff, I think, told me that.
I see. And do you recall, was it very close in time to your letter having been sent to Mr. Moore?
I don't recall.
Do you recall whether your staff said that they had spoken with Mr. Moore personally?
I don't recall.
But you do recall some feedback from the Bureau of Engineering to the effect that the city questioned whether or not the claim, or whether or not the vibrations were caused from work on the
I
Moore
don't
Park
recall
Bridge.
whether or not they were still, there was a period of time or whether they were still doing that same, whatever it was, the
Pile
pile
driving.
driving. Yeah. I don't recall if it had stopped by then or was going forward. So there was a point in time where it was no longer occurring.
Okay, but again, that's a little bit of a deflection. What I'm really concerned about is the nature and the extent of the Bureau of Engineering follow-up to your letter and that information being communicated to you. And what you're saying is you personally did not have any conversations with anybody in the Bureau of Engineering
Correct.
concerning on this issue
Correct.
anymore. Beyond this letter, that was it, as far as you directly in the Bureau of Engineering. Is that right?
Correct.
So it was all on your staff.
Correct.
And then it was up to your staff to report back to you.
Correct.
And you don't have, beyond what you've already testified to, you don't have any specific recollection of your staff telling you anything that the Bureau of Engineering said as to whether or not the constituent claims were caused by the work on the Moore Park Bridge project, other than the fact that Bureau of Engineering didn't believe that to be the case.
I had no other conversation, no.
Okay. Do you recall ever telling your staff to let your constituents know that the Bureau of Engineering questioned whether or not their claims were viable or accurate?
No, I believe they, again, we asked them to go out and do the inspection and talk to the constituents on each of their locations.
Even though the Bureau of Engineering felt that there was no substance to the claims?
I don't recall if that was prior to or after they're going to visit each of the homes.
Do you recall whether or not anybody ever communicated to you, your staff, any efforts by the city to monitor the work once the complaint started?
I don't recall.
Do you know whether or not the city ever installed some kind of vibration monitoring devices on the homes to check the amount of the vibration?
I don't recall.
Did you recall ever asking about that?
Again, I think this was after the work had already, the pilot drivings had occurred.
Mm-hmm. But the complaint started right away after that, correct?
Yes, but I don't remember the timing as to when it stopped. Again, we called when we heard the pilot driving and asked them to follow up, and I don't know the timing between when the calls were made relative to the pile driving, if they had stopped or not stopped by the time they actually went and visited their homes.
Do you know whether or not the pile driving protocol was redesigned or re-engineered?
I do not know.
So,
I don't recall. I don't recall.
But you do have a specific recollection of directing that what happened on Moore Park not happen on Colfax.
That is correct.
And what in the response to, and that was a personal directive that you made, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm almost done. Were you aware the project ran out of money at any time?
No, I was aware we wanted to have the street, fully street repaved, that we put in some street furniture funds. We talked about that in my last deposition.
But as far as the amount budgeted for the project plus the contingency, you were never told that
No, I don't
the
recall.
project ran out of money?
I don't recall.
Do you recall ever making any inquiries about the status of the funding for the project once it had started? Moore Park Bridge I'm talking about.
No.
Anything about, any conversation about change orders that had been initiated that caused the project to increase in cost? Was that ever discussed?
Not that I recall.
So you didn't really know anything about how the financing was going and whether the project was under budget, over budget, any of that stuff?
No, that was under the auspices of the Bureau of Engineering.
why would that have precluded you from making an inquiry about the budget on the project?
Mr. Rice, there's a lot of projects that occur in your district, and you, unless you are told otherwise, you assume they're on target, on budget, that they put forward.
Unless you, so you expect the Bureau of Engineering to volunteer the information to you that they were over budget?
Yes.
And you also expected them to volunteer the fact that that put the Moore Park Bridge project out to bid?
Yes.
And you also expected them to volunteer to you that they were going to start on a specific date?
Yes.
But they didn't do any of that, did they?
You tell me, I don't.
I don't know. I wasn't there, Ms. Greuel. You were. Did they ever do any of that?
Well, as I indicated earlier, I don't want to repeat myself, that they did not tell us about the Moore Park Bridge.
Did you ever chastise them for it?
Yes.
In writing?
I would think that the one you just showed me would have demonstrated that, the September letter.
Okay, so this is the only, for the lack of a better term, chastisement that
As I indicated in my previous deposition, you know, I spoke to Mr. Moore about the fact that we were very unhappy about how this had gone down.
Okay. All right. I think we're
I
3:30.
have one follow-up.
Yeah, sure. It's 3:30. Go ahead.
Right with you, Peter.
Quickly.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Greuel, do you have any plans to be out on vacation first or 2 weeks of June this year?
I have no idea, actually.
You don't know whether you're planning any vacation in June?
No.
When do you expect to know that?
I'd have to check with my husband.
Okay, and if the trial occurs, in this case, in downtown LA, is there any reason why you wouldn't be able to attend for, let's say, a 2 or 3 hour period? Understanding that you have other work commitments, do you anticipate being able to make room for attending trial for 2 or 3 hours?
That depends on the subpoena, Mr. Rappaport.
That's right.
Or your willingness to produce voluntarily?
No.
Without a subpoena? Oh.
No.
Oh, we're going to have to subpoena Ms. Greuel. Okay. All right.
But I didn't get an answer to my question. Do you anticipate having any difficulty scheduling a 2 or 3 hour period to appear at trial?
No problem. Again,
I'm sorry,
I said no problem, again, depending upon the date and time.
Okay, and how much notice would you need in advance to be able to work with that?
10 days.
All right. All right, thank you. I have nothing further.
Okay, so we can do the same stipulation that we did before,
Yes.
which is relieve the report of responsibilities. Original will be prepared, given to Mr. Langsfield. 20 days, actually, I would like maybe 10 days. Mr. Langsfield, are you listening to me?
Yeah, I'm listening to everything.
10 days after Mr. Langsfield's receipt of the transcript, Ms. Greuel will review it, make any corrections, sign it under penalty of perjury, and that Mr. Langsfield produce the original with changes upon request, and that in the absence of that, the parties can use a certified copy with changes, assuming the transcript is signed by Ms. Greuel by the time of trial.
So stipulated.
So stipulated.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, this completes DUD number 1 and concludes the deposition testimony of Wendy Greuel, Volume 2. We're off the record at 3:33.